Great.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. The Rules Committee is today going to consider H.R. 1259, the VA Accountability First Act of 2017, H.R. 1181, Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act, and H.R. 1367 to improve the authority of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to hire and retain physicians and other employees of the Department of Veterans Affairs and for other purposes. H.R. 1181 protects veterans' Second Amendment's rights by prohibiting the Secretary from sending the name of an individual to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, known as the FBI, for inclusion on the National Instant Criminal Background Check called NICS system unless there has been a specific determination by a judge, magistrate, or other judicial authority that such individual is a danger to himself or others. Veterans who are willing to lay down their lives to protect our constitutional rights should not be deprived of theirs as they grow older or as they mature in our society. And depriving them of the Second Amendment rights without a proceeding before judicial authority, in my opinion, is unconstitutional. The committee will also consider H.R. 1259, legislation that provides the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs with the authority to expeditiously remove, demote, or suspend any VA employee, including a senior executive service member employee, based upon performance or misconduct. It also provides improved protections for whistleblowers and allows the Secretary to reduce an employee's federal pension if he or she is convicted of a felony that influenced his or her job while at the VA. The third bill under consideration, H.R. 1367, would make a number of improvements to the VA's ability to identify staffing shortages, to recruit and retain high-quality employees, and to quickly get those that are necessary on board despite the hiring freeze by the President of the United States. And we're going to talk about that, and I know the young chairman as well as the ranking member will want to discuss that. Americans, veterans deserve the highest care and quality that medical services in this country provide, and more efficient delivery of benefits if possible. I look forward to hearing more about this important legislation from our witnesses who are before us today. I would also like to thank the young chairman, Chairman Rowe, Phil Rowe. Phil, I don't know if this is the first time you've been here as chairman or not, but we're delighted, not only proud in my conference, but I think that this body will be well served by not only your professional background as a medical doctor, your knowledge of the of Veterans Affairs, but also your service to the people of Tennessee. Also, the gentleman, the ranking member, Tim, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. I know the people from Minnesota recognize not only your distinguished service to the United States military, but the men and women under your command, so to speak, understood your service and what it meant to them also. Thank you to each of you for preparing and being a part of the legislation before us today. Your ideas do matter, and this is a committee that I know looks at some of the hardest and most important events that tackle our country and have really, quite honestly, been difficult for us to stomach one way or another, and I know both of you stay after that. So before each of you speak, I'd like for you, as you speak, to delineate, if you can, about the bills, whether it be H.R. 1259, H.R. 1181, or whichever bill you may be addressing. And certainly without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record. I would like to add that 2 weeks ago I went with a group of people in Dallas, Texas, to the Dallas VA, and they are an organization of young men called Whiskers for Warriors, and almost every one of them look like they're ZZ Top Band members. These boys wear this beard all the way down to here. And they asked me a year ago to be a part of what they're doing. I've been with them a couple times, but one of the more interesting things is just their attitude about thanking service members. We walked into rooms at the Dallas VA. We didn't announce ourselves. A couple guys thought their truck was about to be repossessed by these guys. They're just kind-hearted men. Well, let me say this. Each of you have seen just normal citizens who extend, a thanks to our veterans. They may raise their ball cap. They may put their hand over their heart. But we recognize that the freedoms that we have today come from the sacrifices of people just like my dad and other people who care deeply about the country we have and the kind of country we have. So I say thank you to both of you. I'm looking forward to this. Before we get to you, we're going to give an opportunity for the gentleman from Massachusetts to engage us also. The gentleman, the ranking member, is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me first state for the record that our ranking member, Ms. Slaughter, is stuck in upstate New York. I almost got stuck in Massachusetts, but I managed to get here, so that's good news for this committee that I'm here today. So I want to say that to you. Yeah, no,
It is good news, Jim.
and
Safely.
I want to welcome both of our witnesses here. Appreciate the work that they do. Let me just say briefly on these three bills. I think on H.R. 1367, I think there's generally bipartisan support for this bill, although I should note that there are 30 amendments that have been filed, so that I hope that we will do everything we can to make those amendments in order, first off. Secondly, on the other two bills, some of us have problems with them. The H.R. 1259, the so-called VA Accountability First Act of 2017, many of us view that bill as an attempt to undermine legitimate efforts to improve accountability at the VA by stripping employees of their union negotiated protections. There is bipartisan, I think there is bipartisan a desire to reform the VA to make it better, and I think a lot of Democrats would have been happy to be supportive of this bill if it was not an attack on collective bargaining, if those rights weren't stricken. But again, I think this is kind of keeping with what we see on a lot of Republican bills, is that there's this constant attempt to undermine, the rights of individuals to engage in collective bargaining. This is yet another attack on unions, and I think that's unfortunate. On the second bill, H.R. 1181, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act, many of us fear that this bill will lead to more veteran suicides. I'm not sure if the committee knows this, but that each and every day, roughly 20 veterans commit suicide, and 2/3 of those suicides are carried out using firearms. The veteran suicide rate is more than 20% higher than the civilian rate. And the truth is that many gun-related suicides are preventable. So I think, there are lots of veterans organizations that have taken issue with this legislation. They believe we ought to be finding ways to make counseling and treatment more available to veterans rather than, I think, doing the NRA's bidding. I think that's what this is about. But you guys are in charge, and you can bring what you want to the floor. But I think we have one bill that we think is okay, and we have two other bills that I think many of us have problems with. And I look forward to the testimony, and I yield back.
Mr. McGovern, thank you very much. Gentlemen, I think you both recognize that the issue that is before us today seems a political issue. Seems a political issue because one party did control the VA for some period of time, and I was not happy with what they did, and Mr. McGovern doesn't have to be happy with what I might think is the right way to run the place. Bottom line is, you're the people that matter. You're the people that are closest to the activity. I would really be hard-pressed to believe both of you do not deep down have not only appreciation and respect for the men and women at the VA, but the people who are in there. But I will just add, I would hate to see where my party engaged in any attack against a union contract, but rather it would be because a person did not, in my opinion, properly take care of a person that was in their care. And that should be a wide line, not a thin line. And I will tell you, hospitals are difficult places, but criminal or taking advantage of a circumstance should result, in my opinion, in a firing, a demotion, or other activity. And if you figure that's what this is about, then I think you ought to say it. If it's not, if you think it's about a political hunt and Tim, I want to hear from you. If you think that's what it is, then tell me. But I think it's about taking care of people that are in the care of the VA. I'm in our VAs, and I see our people, and I think they do a good job. But where you've got somebody that's negligent, I would hate to call that a political witch hunt. So I think you know what I'm saying. I'm going to defer to you. Mr. Chairman, we're glad that Chair Jim was recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. McGovern, for your comments, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on H.R. 1181 and the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act and H.R. 1259, the VA Accountability First Act. I first want to start with H.R. 1181, which would simply ensure that veterans have the same constitutional rights as everyone else. Under current VA policy, VA may decide to appoint a fiduciary to help a veteran manage his or her finances, and this might be perfectly appropriate in a number of scenarios. There are many reasons why the beneficiary could need help, such as a veteran may have received a traumatic brain injury in service to our country and may no longer have the math skills to balance his or her checking account. It's important to remember, however, that a VA bureaucrat, not a judge or magistrate, makes the decision to appoint a fiduciary. The VA employee makes this decision based on whether the veteran can handle his or her VA funds. The employee does not determine whether a veteran is a danger to himself or others. The problem is that when a VA appoints a fiduciary, the department also sends the veterans' names to the FBI for inclusion on the NICS list. And as you know, when a person is placed on the NICS list, he or she can no longer possess a firearm. So just like that, the veteran who fought to preserve the freedoms guaranteed by our nation's Constitution is deprived of his or her Second Amendment rights without due process of law. H.R. 1181 is drafted would simply prohibit the VA from continuing to send beneficiaries' names to NICS in the future, unless there is an order from a judge or magistrate that says the person may harm themselves or others. This is a common-sense proposal that would guarantee that our nation's heroes are afforded the constitutional protections they risk their lives to protect. And now I want to take a few moments to discuss my other bill on the agenda today, H.R. 1259. It's no secret to anyone that a major problem plaguing the Department of Veterans Affairs is the pervasive lack of accountability. To address this issue, my bill would provide the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs with yet another tool to instill accountability at VA by giving him the authority to expeditiously remove, demote, or suspend any VA employee for poor performance or misconduct while still maintaining an appropriate level of due process rights for the employee. This language is similar to H.R. 5620, which came through this committee and passed out of the House on a bipartisan veto-proof majority last summer. Taking into account some of the improvements members offered during the debate last year, the bill before you today adds more time for due process on the front end and greater levels of appeal on the back end. My bill would also expand the protections for the brave whistleblowers that come forward to report wrongdoing or waste by specifically barring VA from using removal authority provided in this legislation if the employee has an open whistleblower complaint with the Office of Special Counsel or an ongoing complaint set up by the new whistleblower process that passed as part of the Continuing Appropriations and Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act 2017 and Zika Response and Preparedness Act last year. H.R. 1259 would also authorize the Secretary to recoup bonuses and relocation expenses from VA employees when necessary, and would authorize the Secretary to recoup a portion of an employee's retirement benefits if they're convicted of a felony that influenced their work performance. Finally, the bill would provide the Secretary with direct hiring authority for VA networks and medical center directors. This has been a request of the former and current administrations. It would make it easier for Secretary Shulkin to hire these directors who are so critical to the mission of the department. This bill has strong support from 14 national veterans groups and counting. It's also supported by the administration. I've worked closely with Secretary Shulkin and his team since day one, and I'm proud to have his endorsement. As I said at the Committee on Veterans Affairs markup, Dr. Shulkin is someone who garnered the trust and respect of two presidents of two different parties to serve our veterans, 100-0 vote. And I hope, therefore, that my colleagues understand that his support and assistance in crafting this bill before us today is because real accountability at the Department of Veterans Affairs is a veteran issue, not a political issue, and that no effort toward real reform at the department as a whole will ever be successful absent a strong culture of accountability first. I also want to note that I filed a manager's amendment to the bill which would provide a technical change that does not change the substance of H.R. 1259. In closing, I ask that this committee debates the numerous amendments that have been filed to H.R. 1259, that you make only in order amendments that specifically relate to accountability at VA. While many of these amendments are well-intentioned and contain some good policy, I think it's best to let these ideas, a few of which have passed the House and previous Congresses, go through regular order so they can be fully vetted and so we can provide the necessary offsets where appropriate. I thank you once again for inviting me to testify today on behalf of these bills and for your dedication to fulfilling our promise to Americans' veterans. I'm happy to answer any questions. I yield back.
Chairman Rowe, thank you very much. Your ranking member is not new to the committee, Phil. He has been up here. He served our great country, United States Army, as a sergeant major, and in my opinion, I believe that's correct to say you're the highest ranking enlisted soldier in the history of the military to enter the United States Congress. And that comes as a deep respect and appreciation. I know you have seen difficult circumstances and know that you want a fair opportunity for these members of our military to be treated with respect and dignity. And it is why I can openly say that your opinion is very important. The gentleman's recognized and welcomed by this committee, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions, and I can attest to the fact that I have always felt that way up here, and I appreciate the impact from and the input from every single member of this committee. So thank you for that. And I'd also like to echo your comments on our chairman, Chairman Rowe. Very few people in my life have I met with the integrity and the honesty and the desire to get things right than Phil Rowe. And I say that because we've had the opportunity to work side by side in different capacities over the better part of the last decade. So I want to be very clear on this. You're exactly right, Mr. Chairman, that our goals are perfectly aligned on this. It's about accountability with an understanding that how we're defining accountability across the spectrum, getting and keeping and retaining good people, and removing people after due process who should be removed, and removing people who are a threat to the safety of our veterans immediately. They don't even need to, nor do they have due process. If someone's a threat or negligent to care, they're not eligible for grievance processes through their union, so that doesn't even apply to them right here. But there are instances, with all of us agree, situations where we see, and we're frustrated, we see it in the news, where people who we know are not acting in the best interest of the veterans, they're acting in their own self-interest. My point on this is every single person that we have subpoenaed to come does not fall under union grievance processes. They are executives, and there's already things that we need to do with them. So I want to be very clear. No, there is not any daylight between us about getting accountability. There's about 90% that we agree on. There is a differences of how we get there, and that's why I'm going to offer an amendment that I think can try and get us there. But I'm not questioning. I'm not questioning the motives of folks here, but I will say this. We would be naive to think this is not a political issue for some people, because as I told the chairman, we debated this in the cordial, open, and constructive manner we always do in the VA. And by the time I had returned back to my offices, the television ads were already running against me on this subject. So we can't be so naive to think others aren't seeing that. But I do think it's important, as Mr. McGovern pointed out, there will be those who will see that. But I'm here to answer your question, Mr. Sessions. No, that's not the belief of this committee. That's not the chairman's intention at all. The chairman's intention is to provide accountability and the best quality care to our veterans. That is without question. So I have an amendment that I think can fix some of that. And more importantly, I think I have an amendment that that will assure this gets through the United States Senate, which is the bane of every one of us up here with the best ideas we have that die before they get there. And I think this is one, because of some of those concerns that come up, are going to have a very difficult time to move. So my amendment to H.R. 1259 would replace Sections 3 and 9 of the underlying bill with a bipartisan piece of legislation called the Veterans First Act, introduced by Senator Isaacson last Congress. It has support from both sides of the aisle and also those same veteran service organizations. My hope that we could reach a compromise with the Senate on accountability. I believe that this amendment would make it in, if it's made in order, we can debate it on the House floor and have a vote on it. The amendment specifically targets the senior executive. It's been the senior executives, not the frontline employees, that have been subpoenaed before our committee, and the VA fails to hold them accountable. When they get it wrong, and there are some that I issued the subpoena for. The first one the VA committee's history ever was issued, it was my name on it during the last administration to send a strong signal that it was unacceptable. And I'm here to tell you quite disappointedly, that person still holds their position. Now, some of that is because proper procedures weren't followed. Some of it is because we didn't go through the due process rights, and that employee does have that ability. So I think, like H.R. 1259, it provides an expedited process for the VA Secretary to hold senior executives and employees accountable. For SES employees, the employee would get 10 business days' notice. The employee subject to an adverse action would be able to grieve that action through an internal grievance process. Has to be done in 21 days. The employee would be permitted to appeal an adverse action to a court, which, of course, they should be provided. It would also require the VA Secretary to develop a performance management system for SES employees. For a VA employee, the employee would be removed for misconduct on poor performance that took place within the previous 2 years before the proposed removal. The employee would get 10 business days' notice. The employee would get 10 business days to respond to the charge. The VA Secretary would be required to provide the employee a decision in a reasonable period of time, and the employee would have 10 days to appeal that to the Merit System Protection Board. They'd have 90 days to adjudicate the whole thing. During that time, no pay, no benefits, nothing to the employee. My amendment would also leave in place Sections 4 through 8 of 1259, because I agree that employees convicted of felonies connected to their jobs should not receive pensions. Poor-performing employees should not receive bonuses and should be recouped. There's no disagreement there. Most importantly, my amendment provides a fair process that protects whistleblowers. By allowing our frontline employee to use arbitration and grievance procedures under collective bargaining agreements, these frontline employees remain protected from bad managers who want to retaliate against them for speaking out when something is wrong. And I want to be clear, and tomorrow I'll provide examples of this. Over half of these people are veterans themselves. And I'm going to give you examples of bad managers who fired employees who were veterans, who then went through the grievance process and were reinstated, rightfully so. And so I just asked the chairman and the chairman of the committee, give us an opportunity to debate this amendment on the floor. Give us an opportunity to improve upon this piece of legislation, because I agree, the chairman is exactly right on everything he said about the need to have the accountability, the need to protect the good employees in the VA. But if we can't get it through the Senate, and we do something that not only gets what we're trying to get to, but goes further and hurts good employees, I think we would rue the day we would have to come back and then fix that to make sure that didn't happen. So I thank the chairman again for the opportunity and the fair hearing we're always given in this committee, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you very much. Chairman Rowe, thank you very much. Chairman Rowe, you came to a number of your colleagues last year as you were seeking this job, and you indicated your desire to become engaged in the issues that not only were placed before the Congress, but that were a daunting task before this great nation as we honor our veterans. I want you to know that I have not only great faith and confidence in you. I know as an Eagle Scout you believe in leaving your campsite better than the way you found it. But I want you to know that this committee, both you and your ranking member, will be welcome up here, and we need to expedite your ideas. We need to make sure we're listening to you, and I think the gentleman made a great argument on behalf of what he believes. But I want you to know that I, quite honestly, are trusting in you to get this done. And it's not anything that I'm putting off on you. It's that we have watched for years and years and years. I remember when Secretary Shinseki came to office, and I met with him, and I told him, I'm here to help you. It's a huge organization, and I think you're asking for tools, and I respect what you're doing, and I appreciate you very much. Chairman Cole.
This is a little off point, but just out of curiosity, Representative Walsh, do you have any children? The reason I ask is my dad was a career master sergeant when that was the top rank for non-commissioned officers, and I just want to extend my sympathy and understanding to your children. As you guys
You're
are
still doing push-ups?
pretty tough guys, yeah. No, I never forget when my brother came home from basic training in the Air Force, and he looked across the table at my dad and said, "Dad, I had no idea how powerful you were." And I know two of my friends distinguished service as well in the Vietnam era, and obviously the care both of you bring. So I don't have any questions. I always enjoy it when both of you come here because this is one of the genuinely bipartisan committees in Congress. And frankly, Congress, and I must say, administrations have done a pretty good job, Republican, Democrat-like. This is a place we've been willing to write the check, so to speak. The frustration has been, and I know you both share it, that we seem to have at times an intractable bureaucracy. Now, I will tell you, my father spent the last 12 years of his life in a veteran's home and got superb care. He had Alzheimer's, and so his country was certainly there for him in the way that he'd been there for his country. So I don't disparage the men and women over there, but we get so many concerns and complaints when care is not adequate because this is something the American people really want us to get right. They really do, and I know you're both trying to do that. We entrust enormous sums to the VA. Frankly, it's one of the few areas where we spend more money every year. It's been pretty much immune from budget cuts, and appropriately so. I mean, that's been. But the task here is to try and get it right. And when we have people that do the wrong things, to make sure that they are disciplined quickly, and frankly, they're gotten out of situations. We've had a couple of situations in Oklahoma and veterans facilities where we've had, some unfortunate bad apples, and they don't typify those workforces. And I know that just personally from what my own family went through, and frankly, the care and support we got from the employees at the veterans facilities, two different ones where my dad was located. But again, that does happen, and I just want to commend both of you for your efforts, your service to the country, and what you're trying to do to make sure that we keep our commitments as a country to people that have been willing to put everything on the line to defend the United States of America. Then I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I want to associate myself with your words of confidence for both of these young men and the job of their committee. It's kind of, we don't always have whole committees up here, but we appreciate them a lot. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, and I, again, want to reiterate the view that many of us who oppose this bill, some of us oppose the VA Accountability First Act of 2017, that we are very much dedicated to getting rid of people who, quite frankly, are not serving our veterans. That's not the point I was making, and I think Mr. Walls articulated a thoughtful amendment, and I would ask the chairman, would he be in favor of making the Walls amendment in order so we could have that debate on the floor?
Would be.
Good. Okay. Well, that's
Is that a question for me?
I was asking. Well, I was going to ask this chairman,
Well,
but
I was trying to help him
but
out.
I guess it doesn't matter what you say.
I'm
He
trying to
said-
play Sean Spicer.
He said. He said.
Be careful, Chairman.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on that at the end of the hearing, by the way.
I forgot to call him and ask.
Right,
but
I know. So that's reassuring. And then I would ask unanimous consent with regard to the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. If we can insert in the record a letter from Veterans Coalition for Common Sense, which I don't know if you've seen
That
it,
objection
Mr.
later
Chairman,
on the record.
strongly disagrees with this bill, but it's signed by some of the people we all know and respect, people like General Wesley Clark, General Michael Hayden, General Stanley McChrystal, General David Petraeus, and a whole bunch of others who are very, very concerned about the impact that this bill would have. And they point out in their letter that amongst the people that who are right now prohibited from purchasing a firearm are people diagnosed with schizophrenia or post-traumatic stress disorder or dementia or Alzheimer's or serious depression. And they also point out that there are current law protects veterans' Second Amendment rights through due process, but I think they argue in this letter, and I would encourage the chairman to read it, that, they fear that this, if your bill would pass, that it would result in more suicides and more deaths of veterans. And I think it's just worth considering their opinion on this as well. And so I appreciate you both being here, and look forward to making as many amendments in order as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Without objection, we entered that into the record, and I want you to know that your crack staff made sure I got a copy of this, and I appreciate the chance to see this letter dated March the 14th, 2017, and thank you very much. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being a little bit late to the meeting, and so as a consequence, Dr. Rowe, I did not hear your testimony. I did hear the testimony of Mr. Waltz, and just for my clarification, the issues that he brought up about due process protections, I mean, are these things that are built into the bill?
Yes, Dr. Burgess, basically the section that he wants to remove, well, again, we do not remove the due process protections. We just shorten the time frame. What's happened is there are actually two roads you can go down in this process. One, with the collective bargaining route, can take over a year to get rid of bad employees. One was involved in an armed robbery. It took a year to get rid of this person. So this maintains those. It just shortens it. And I actually changed when this first draft was brought to me. It was brought within 14 days, and I said, no, that's not enough time. We need to have 10 business days, which is 2 weeks, instead of in case there was a holiday on a Monday or something. So this allows 10 business days. And by the way, I had breakfast with the secretary this morning. This was the first thing he talked about. He needs this tool right here to be able to do what he needs to do. And look, the VA is not firing too many people. There are good people out there, as the ranking member pointed out, that can get caught up by a manager who's not doing their job correctly, and they're protected by this. It just shortens the process.
Very well. I appreciate your clarification. Again, I apologize for being late. I want to thank both of you for your service on this committee. It is and should be a priority for each of us in the United States Congress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida, Judge Hastings.
Thank you very much,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman. I echo the sentiments that were expressed by all of the members with reference to Chairman Rowe and Ranking Member Waltz. I would urge my good friend from Oklahoma that while Mr. Waltz's rank allows that he's a tough guy, he has a daughter that I've seen, and he ain't so tough with her. But I also, since we have this newfound comity and I have an amendment, I'm going to ask if Mr. Waltz could present my amendment. I might fare better. But all things considered, I do have a question, and there's a statistic floating around that in the VA, there are 45,000 vacancies. Is, to the best of your knowledge, is that accurate, or if not, what is more accurate?
Well, it's a great question, because I posed that question with the secretary this morning. Judge, when I came to Congress in 2009, the VA had around 260,000 employees. Today, they have north of 360,000 employees. So they've added 100,000 people. We and the taxpayers of this country have almost doubled the budget in that 8-year period of time when the rest of discretionary spending was stable. As Mr. Cole said, we've done that, and we all have done it because we think it's the right thing to do. And I talked to the secretary today. There are probably some places they do need to hire some people, and the minute the hiring freeze came out, the ranking member will affirm this, I was the first one to write a letter to the new administration saying we have to hire doctors and nurses and people at that level. This hiring freeze, as the secretary pointed out today, is over at 90 days. I think they need to recalibrate where those people are. And I think if they would do that and get more people down by the bedside, and that's where they need to be, actually caring for our veterans, not shuffling papers.
Yeah, I follow you, and I appreciate your clarity with reference to the matter. I'll get to speak to my amendment a little bit later, but it addresses that subject, as have several of the amendments addressing the subject of the existing vacancies. And you pinpoint where I think we should focus, and that is to don't let a bureaucracy that needs to change not have in place the positions that are critical for veterans' care. And that's ultimately what I think is your goal, and I believe it's the goal of every member of the House of Representatives, quite frankly. I thank you. Yeah, Mr.
Mr.
Walsh?
Chairman, if I could address the gentleman from Florida, it's a great question, too, and I think it brings us back to this, that there is great agreement on this accountability that expands to making sure we have the right people in there. Dr. Rowe has experience in the private sector on hiring physicians and what it takes to do that, from credentialing and all of those things. It's just way too cumbersome to hire someone. It might be harder to hire them than it is to fire them in some cases. That is also part of this problem. So I think you bring up, when we're talking the tools necessary, it is much broader than that. And whether the number is 45,000, I think that the chairman did adequately state that. I think many of us are concerned that when we do increased hiring, we do end up with a lot of middle management, that no matter where you're at, we're strongest supporter of the VA, but you can't deny in some cases that we're better off if we would get closer to the veterans. So I think when we talk accountability bills, and again, I would ask us all to keep that in mind, let's figure out how to streamline the hiring process too. It goes hand in hand, because again, you're right, there may be not too many people being fired, but you can't fire your way to a better VA alone. You're going to have to hire, and retain quality employees. And how you do that is also a part of the climate that you're creating. If you believe that managers can arbitrarily remove you or whatever, those things cause grief. Or if you believe there's too many managers. In some cases, I've heard VA employees tell me they're not sure who they report to because there's too many of them. And those are things that we can do too, and I know the chairman is on that. So you're going to see us up here more. I think this is one of the first things, so I hope that we take these things, that there's a holistic approach coming that I think's been missing from the VA, and we're differing on the mechanics of this, not the goals. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now you're back.
Gentlemen, you're back. Time. Thank you very much. I think what you gentlemen are hearing is a sincere appreciation of you taking your time. I know the gentleman, Brad Winstrom is here, a physician by nature, a military man, probably third in line to being a husband. Your military service is important to you, and you're focused on the right things. We care too, and I think the reason why I interjected the way I did, Mr. McGovern, is I didn't want to have to put Mr. Rowe in a circumstance of explaining what I believe this committee would do. And he does have an opinion, and he did say where there is an amendment that is about accountability, he would be in favor of that debate. And I wanted to answer directly, I think it's about accountability. So it should be a part of the debate, and I appreciate the gentleman very much. Judge, thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think the conversation here is fun, and with the two of you, working that, and I know my friend Brad as well, and the others on that committee are working very hard, and as someone who continues to serve, and on this committee, being a part of the Air Force and Sergeant Major, yes, you and my chiefs, I still are the highest ranking in the room. So for anybody who's had one of those gold bars on their shoulders and runs into a sergeant major or a chief in any of the branches, we know who's in charge, so that's not a problem. Fortunately, I've moved on through great training from my chiefs and my senior NCOs, as we have. But a few things that I want to discuss here. One, the VA is, I've said this over and over again, there's no reason a veteran should have to call any of our offices to get help, period. That's the most ridiculous thing in our country right now, is that veterans have to call a congressional office to get help. That's just stupid, number one. And especially when it takes up, and I'm sure it does like in your offices, it does mine, we have currently somewhere in the range of 200 to 300, possibly 400 open VA cases. A lot of them are getting there. I mean, we've had issues just this past week where they couldn't get through. They had to call our office. The gentleman was having heart issues and ended up having heart surgery that night. But it took our office to try and get through to get to them. It's just, these are the kind of things. That's why, frankly, I am very extremely measured with the new secretary. I'm not convinced yet. I'm not remotely buying in on this appointment yet, because I have seen, he comes from the previous administrations in which we've seen the simple stuff not get done. I mean, things like purchasing and things that are within the Secretary's purview that does not need this Congress to work on. I mean, when you had issues at like the Atlanta VA, which we're not even getting scheduling issues, when they had a dishwasher break, a piece on their automatic dishwasher break. And because of the past problems with the cards, because instead of just firing people and getting rid of them and fixing the way we purchase, they had to put it through, because it's $17,000 or somewhere in that range, they had to put it through a whole RFP program. And so for over several months, we were actually buying paper products at a cost more than the part. That could have been fixed. Former secretary knew about it, didn't fix it. Had been run up the chain. So when they start making the simple stuff, it's almost trust but verify on this one for me. Because until they start doing the simple stuff, it's almost, I'm so glad y'all's bills are here and your amendments and we talk about those. But until we start doing the simple stuff, the employees have no direction. They don't see that from the top. And Dr. Rowe, I know we've talked about this many times, and Sergeant Major, you get this as well. This is something that's going to be worked on. And so I'm glad to see that as we move forward. You'll have all the support in the world from me on that as we go forward. But also, I do want to talk about this Second Amendment issue, and I do have the letter here. And if you don't, and most of you know that I'm a chaplain. I'm an attorney, but I'm also a chaplain. My service in the military is a chaplain, and not only here, but in Iraq and other places. I dealt with this on a very different level when it comes to suicide. When you hit suicide, you prick my ears up here, because probably, maybe you, there's very few in this room from the perspective of counseling and working with people who pick up the phone and say, I want to kill myself, that dealt with. So it bothered me when I first looked at and heard some of the comments that were made earlier, because I am very well aware of this. I started looking at this letter. I do have a couple of questions before I get to the letter. We're not, at this point, the way this is written is we're discussing adjudication. We're prohibiting, the current status would prohibit them from purchasing because they would be on the NICS list. Is that what we're saying that they're doing at this point?
Yeah, what happens is, once you get a fiduciary, it's the only place in government where if you just get a fiduciary to help manage you automatically are placed on that list. There have been children on that list. There have been almost 10,000 people have gotten off the list. It shouldn't have been on there. They aged out and asked for. But in this particular thing, you're essentially assumed guilty before you can prove your innocence. It's usually the other way around.
So we're actually keeping them, what we're doing is we're keeping them from buying more weapons into things, or are we actually running, and I want you to explain this because there's a lot of questions here. Are we actually then, if they're putting them on the list, is someone actually going and taking the guns they currently have?
I can't answer that question, but I know you're not allowed to possess a firearm if you're on that list.
Okay, well,
No, it's illegal.
Yeah, the question is coming to get it. Here's the problem. They're coming to get, they're not coming to get it because there's a problematic part of this, and that's why I support what we're doing here, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. The fiduciary is other parts. Is the bill clearly states that what we're saying here is this is fine if adjudicated, and I have a hard time with this word, so at some point I'm on the Judiciary Committee. I'm actually going to go back and look at this because I also do a lot in the mental health realm. Did not realize, even as an attorney, that under Title 18, adjudicated as a mental defective. That language is awful.
It is awful.
Yeah, it is. So this could be at some point, maybe through judiciary or somewhere else, we clean up the code. We need to get this kind of language out of there. Because if we're actually truly wanting to help people who are suicidal, who have mental health conditions and have problems, what are we saying? We want you to come in so we can label you a defective. You're not defective. No more than when I had a boot on my leg was I defective because my Achilles was cut. You have something mentally wrong that we want to fix. You're valuable. But language like this is bad. And so that's another issue. But it's adjudicated. So when you get adjudicated, the problem here is currently happens without adjudication, that it puts the onus on the service member to go in. I'm going to have another angle on this because I actually have service members who will not go to the VA because of fiduciary or others who won't go to get help because this is going on. So one point I'm told we got to fight suicide because we're going to tell them that they can't go buy a gun. And then at the same point in time, I've got veterans who won't go to the VA because of this rule. But then I want to look at this letter. This is at the point in time where we just honestly can't seem to have at least some honest discussion back and forth. The first paragraph of this letter, And I'm really, when I look at this letter, it does concern me, given the nature of this, that some of these generals on the back here signed this letter, and admirals. I understand the desire, and I think it was probably pitched to them as, we're going to help suicide prevention here, so this is a bad idea. But I mean, if they read the letter, God bless them, they put their sign on it. But look at what it says here. This proposal will put American veterans who need our support in the most way, in harm's way, providing them with easy access to firearms. Somebody stand up right now and tell me how this bill would provide, by not passing this bill, we provide easy access to firearms. Somebody here, I mean, this is crazy. So what we're seeing here is, this proposal would put American veterans who need our support the most in harm's way by providing them easy access to firearms. Excuse me. Go raise money on your own time. That's ridiculous. And it makes all of these other discussions about those who truly need mental health treatment at risk. Because they're turning away now, and now we're adding this in and saying, don't do this. You know, again, we continue on here. This is great. It goes in here and it talks about mental health and the 20 veterans. Actually, frankly, it's more than 20. So we can do the 20 push-ups and 20, which Chairman and I actually did in support of this.
24.
24, exactly. Whew, maybe I didn't know 25. But the problem is there's more than this, because this only counts the ones that we know that have veterans care. There's more than this right now. And it's going to progressively get worse. But then this paragraph on the back page says, but they're not the only ones. In 2008, President Bush signed a law requiring all federal agencies to submit the names of individuals who are, catch this, legally prohibited from possessing guns to NICS. Notice what it says there, legally, that's adjudicated. That means it's not been that you have a fiduciary. It means it's gone through the process. We've adjudicated you to be legally needing to be on this list. That's not what's happening right now. That's all this bill does. So if you want to proof check it by saying President Bush signed a letter saying this, well, at least get it right. At least be honest. Don't be deceptive. I appreciate their concern. I appreciate what they do for the coalition. But this is deceptive. It's not true. As we go through this is a matter of due process. As a chaplain and a lawyer, this hits me on both sides. But to simply say that by opposing this, we're going, as it says here, that you should provide easy access to firearms, we can debate that. That's another issue to debate on how easy access to firearms is. But to say this does that? Mr. Chairman, when I got this letter, I was already concerned. You know, I was going to vote for this bill. I think it's something that is good because it does provide the adjudication process from just simply fiduciary. It doesn't put the onus on the veteran. It puts this back at where it needs to be. But then when I see this, as someone who has been on the other end of that phone and used suicide as an excuse here, don't bring this to me. Don't bring this to me. When I have to deal with another chaplain in the United States because I found a military member and I had to help that unit when they found him in the bathroom, in the porta potty in Iraq because he killed himself. Don't bring this to me. Bring your arguments. If you want to say that we need more mental health, I'm with you. You say we need to help put more mental health dollars in it, I'm there. You say that we need to help them be encouraged to come in and not be called mental defectives, all in. But don't use another passion here to divert exactly what the bill does. It simply says, fine, if they're in this, adjudicate it. Adjudicate it, not just simply fiduciary. I appreciate all discussion in this. But I just, and I even appreciate the gentleman from Massachusetts actually using this. I don't care if a group does it. I do care if it's not right. I do care if it's inflammatory. And I do care that if it makes statements that are not clear at the expense of those that you serve and that I still serve with. This is wrong. Debate the bill, vote yes, vote no. Choice. But don't use something like this. And this is, I blame the group. Not that it was admitted, I blame the group. And I can't believe that these guys on the back who have better knowledge of this would sign on to something that's not truthful. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman, yes, back to time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Well, I heard that. I was just hoping to give, and I inquire Mr. Waltz to kind of walk me through. I think, if I understand it correctly, this bill on the firearm access to veteran piece, it says that it would remove the part that says they go through, they get flagged, I guess, on the background check if they're not administering their own benefits. Is that how that works? And what is the criteria for not being able to administer your own benefits? What is the test for that? What is the test for that?
It could be, the test could be you can't sign the document anymore. Maybe you don't have maybe you're right-handed and you have a stroke on the left side, you can't, whatever. It may be that.
Could be physical.
It could be
That's-
physical, it can be mental, it can be traumatic brain injury. And I'll give you an example. It's a good question you asked, but we have people who are 100% rated for PTSD, and they don't lose their Second Amendment rights. But if you get a fiduciary, you do. And 32,000 people last year were put on that list, and I think the NICS brought almost 10,000 of them off because they were just on.
Well, if you have a fiduciary, you're unable to administer your own documents, sign your own documents is basically it, right?
Well, yes, but some people.
Now, let's say that they're on that list. What would the process of buying a gun entail currently? It's my understanding they're not prohibited from getting a gun. What does that process look like?
Once you're on the NICS, once you get that fiduciary, you're entered into the NICS list, you cannot purchase a firearm.
Oh, even if you go back to the FBI, is that correct? You actually can purchase one?
You cannot until you come off the list.
Well, but is there a way to get off the list if you have a fiduciary?
It is possible to get off the list, but it is very difficult to do.
Do you have to give up your fiduciary, or can you maintain a fiduciary?
That's one way to do it.
Okay, well, let's say you really need the fiduciary. How can you get off the list and legally buy a
I don't know
gun?
the answer to that. I'll try to get that for you.
Is there a way, or I don't know?
Yeah,
if it's-
we'll try
We
to
don't
get
know,
that.
but it's difficult.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. And then what this bill would do is it would change this criteria to what? What would it change that to?
Well, basically, all you would do, you wouldn't, because you got a fiduciary, wouldn't make you mentally incompetent. Would just
Yeah.
allow you to go ahead and own the gun you have right now. It would treat you the same as every other.
Well, so what happens if you require a fiduciary, but you already own a firearm? Is that,
That's the question that Mr. Collins asked.
Yeah.
I'm not, I mean, you legally cannot own a firearm if you own the.
so it's not just purchasing it, you're talking about owning it?
Can't own it.
Possessing, okay. Because background checks we talk about purchasing, but owning is different because you may have one that your grandfather passed down to you or that you bought from when you were before the fiduciary. Okay, just trying to walk through. I hope all these emerge on the debate on the floor because there's a lot of these questions that many of us have. Go ahead.
Yeah, she just told me that if you're on the NICS list and you own a firearm, you've got to get rid of the firearm.
So if you, say that again, if
If you're on the NICS list
Yeah.
and you have a firearm and you get this fiduciary and you're put on the NICS list and you have a weapon, a gun in your home that your grandfather gave, you've got to get rid of that gun legally.
now that's not enforced in practice, right? I've never heard of any.
I don't know, but you're breaking
Have you
federal
ever,
law.
have you ever heard of any cases of that being enforced?
Oh, yeah.
On ownership, not on purchase. Yeah,
If it's in your possession or in your residence, yes.
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, and I would,
Excuse just a moment, please.
sure.
Yeah.
Gentleman controls the.
Yeah, I'd be happy to
Oh,
yield to
sorry.
the gentleman from Minnesota. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And these are all incredibly valid questions. Mr. Collins's passion and experience, unfortunately, with this is well-grounded, and he provided I think, a very clear and valid points about this. The thing I fear about, and in full disclosure, I come down on the side, I'll be supporting this piece of legislation, but the minorities, the dissenting minority opinion on this, Mr. Chairman, is these are incredibly valid, passionate, and again, I think we're trying to get to the same goal. We just didn't have time to do it in the committee. This thing did not come through. We did it in markup. And I know that's not a critique here from timing or whatever. We're going to ask that we maybe back this one up, get it on, because I think if Mr. Collins makes his points the way he made it, there's going to be a lot of folks that are listening. They're open-minded. They're going to try and hear this, as well as I think when you hear the concerns of, does this increase the chance of suicides? Do we really know? And our critique that's going to come, and again, as I said, I am supportive of this because I agree with the ranking member. I agree with Mr. Collins' point on this, but I also agree with where my colleagues are coming from. There are valid points that we can't even answer yet on this. And my concern was I couldn't answer all the questions on it. I thought maybe we needed to spend more time on that. So it's my hope that in lieu of that these amendments are made in order to allow us to have that debate on the floor. And I think that goes a long ways to assuring people. Because this is, again, while not political maybe here, we all know it'll be political outside of this room, and those groups will use this decision as a proxy for a broader issues outside of the realm of what we're trying to get at. Keep in mind, these are folks that could have landed at D-Day, can't sign their name, they have a weapon from that war, and it's going to be asked to be removed. That is a very real, and I'm not stretching to the edge, that is possible. Even if it's not happening in practice, I think that goes against where we're at, even though those deep concerns, there's too many firearms out there or the laws are not being enforced, that's not what we're addressing here. We're addressing a veteran that's actually not given the right to go to that judge to have this determined. And so I ask that maybe what we can do to make things in order, I think, would help us.
Yes, I thank the gentleman. I'll yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
I even have a better idea, and that is that the Veterans Affairs Committee should do a hearing. You did a markup, and I guess the new definition of regular order around here these days doesn't take into account the importance of a hearing. But rather than disparaging the admirals and the generals who wrote the letter, I mean, maybe call them before the Veterans Affairs Committee and actually ask them why they wrote this letter and what they believe. And if we can't answer specific questions that were raised here today, that's why you do a hearing. And so, I think that would be, as far as I know, you didn't do a hearing. There was no hearing done in this Congress, and I think it would be a useful thing to do. So I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Yeah, and I just wish, I wish these, and I appreciate, obviously, the majority approaching this in a bipartisan manner, but I think it would be even better to approach it in a consensus manner, because as you know, Democrats take very seriously the right to bear arms. I'm, for instance, a sponsor of a bill with Mr. Rohrbacher that would, if you have a prior conviction for a marijuana-related offense in a state where it's now legal, it would restore your right to bear arms if you were convicted of a marijuana-related felony for something that is now legal. But in this intersection, I'm sure all my friends agree, in this intersection of who is mentally competent or a danger to themselves or others, interfacing with many rights, not just the right to bear arms, interfacing with many rights, it is a very complicated area. It goes up to the point, as you know, of somebody being deprived of their own liberties if they're in immediate danger to themselves or others. They can be involuntarily committed. These are all very, very touchy areas. And it's not that there shouldn't be some process for depriving somebody of their liberty. There is, just as there should be some process of depriving them of their right to bear arms and others. But it is one that I would hope our body can approach in a consensus-driven manner, where we can have, the whole House or 95% of the House agree. And I don't know if we're quite there on this bill. Maybe some of the amendments help get us there, but I just want to indicate I would hope that on these issues of mental competency and rights, we try to address them more than even in a bipartisan manner, in truly a consensus-driven manner. And I hope that we can get there on these kinds of issues. Happy to yield if either of you want to comment.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. One, we have debated this and voice voted it out of the House 4 times, the committee, to the House, 2011, 12, and 13 in the last week. And to your comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, was that the floor of the House or the
committee?
The committee voice voted it?
We voice voted it, I think, one time on the House floor.
Well, I think that would be a good alternative to find something that no member would stand against moving through. But this is coming for us in a rule, which is why, maybe you want to improve it. The other reason people get a rule people get a rule for one of two reasons. Either they want to make it more consensus-driven by allowing amendments to be part of it, or they feel it's divisive enough to engender the need to get a majority vote instead of a two-thirds vote. So I'm not sure which is the case here. I hope it's to move towards consensus. There are multiple reasons to seek a rule. I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Just for the record, there are 50 new members in this Congress who have, who I think deserve the opportunity to be exposed to a hearing and the processes that you've talked about. And in the previous incarnations coming out of your committee, I believe there have been minority views, so it's not all been consensus-driven. And again, I mean, with all of that, there were still all these questions that we can't answer. So maybe we ought to go back to the drawing board and do this more thoughtfully. And I thank the gentleman, and I yield back.
Yeah, I thank the gentleman for their work on this bill. I do hope that there are amendments that will help make this more of a consensus bill. But yeah, these are very complex and difficult areas that require an apolitical discussion between everybody of good faith, who believes in our Second Amendment rights. I hope that we move in that direction, and I yield back.
Gentleman, just back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Alabama.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I had to leave the room, but I have a question. Let me sort of set it up. Back when I was a new lawyer, I used to do commitments and appointments of custodians. People either couldn't afford somebody or they weren't mentally capable of hiring an attorney, so probate court would take the new lawyers and get us to come down there, so I did dozens and dozens of these. And under the law, and this is true, I think in virtually every state, Judge, because I think it's a federal court ruling that you have to do this, before I can take away your Fifth Amendment rights to liberty and put you in a mental institution, there has to be an adjudication, and we have to find specifically in that adjudication that you, and this is the same language, that you are a danger to yourself or others. As I remember, it was as evidenced by a recent overt act. So in other words, we can't take away your Fifth Amendment rights unless we adjudicate that. Are you telling me that unless we adopt this bill, we can take away your Second Amendment rights without an adjudication that you're a danger to yourself or others?
You're doing it right now.
Well, I guess I don't understand why it's okay, why we have to give them the adjudication for Fifth Amendment purposes, which I support, by the way, because there was abuse of it before then, which is why we had that case law in the 70s. But it's okay to take away your Second Amendment rights without an adjudication that you're a danger to yourself or others. Is there some rationale for why we would treat two different constitutional rights that are treated equally under the 10th Amendment differently?
I can't answer that question. You'd have to ask the VA why they did that, but I don't think it was, I think they were trying to do the right thing. They just ended up with a result. Sometimes the unintended consequences
Right.
that people who weren't, people that got off, lost their rights, and getting off that NICS is not easy. There's a higher standard than getting off of it, which is the opposite of what our legal system usually.
But I want to make sure I hear about, and I think you got some advice from some staff on this. I want to make sure I heard this. Not only can you not buy a weapon if you're on this list, you cannot possess a weapon.
That's right.
That's correct.
So to take away someone's Second Amendment right to possess a weapon without an adjudication, I think that would be subject to federal court testing under the Constitution of the United States. So I wonder if it's not smart to do this to keep us from having to spend a bunch of money defending what's probably indefensible if it gets to court. I don't know if y'all have even talked about that. Somebody's going to test this.
Yes.
If they haven't already. They're going to test it. And based upon all that case law we've already got with regard to Fifth Amendment rights, I'd be astonished if they wouldn't lose it. I think they would lose it. So it seems to me we're doing the VA a favor, doing ourselves a favor, by establishing a process that we can defend in court. But not only that, it's the right thing to do for our service members, our veterans. I mean, this is something where they shouldn't have to lose their rights because they're in this particular process. If we showed them that there was an adjudication, and the adjudication was fair and appropriate, and I think we could design that pretty easily, then we could assure everybody that everybody's rights are protected. Now, I don't know that you've heard this before, Dr. Rowe, but let me tell you, I'm sensitive to this. My grandfather was shot and killed by a mentally ill person. So this is not an abstract issue to me. I don't want people that have mental problems getting guns and hurting people. But we have to balance that off against people's Second Amendment under the Constitution rights. And it seems to me what you tried to do with your bill is reach that balance based upon what we already know from established case law in the federal courts. That seems what you've done. The gentleman from Minnesota want to add to that any?
No, I think the gentleman is right, and I think both you and Mr. Polis, Mr. Byrne, are hitting on a very important thing. I see it from the perspective as you just described it, and I think it's very important to put that out. But I think Mr. Polis's point on the complexity of these issues is one that is challenged. Ms. Esty on our committee will be addressing this in greater detail. In our markup, she eloquently has done this. She's worked on these issues. It is no secret that she is a representative from Newtown, Connecticut. So these issues do hold deep emotional and deep importance to everyone. But the problem comes into this a little bit that some of these issues were addressed in the 21st Century Cures Act that we passed, and there's some alignment issues. So it's not a critique, it's a suggestion that I think goes where all of you are going. It's my assessment on this. If we did full hearings, brought in those witnesses or whatever, I kind of come to the conclusion myself we're going to end where both of you are speaking, but in a way that does what Mr. Polis asked, is build consensus, which I think is very much right, addressing the very valid points that Mr. McGovern brought up that concerns him. So this is more of a process in the committee side of things, but all of these questions, and the chairman is right. We've done this in the past. We've held hearings and we brought in witnesses on these, and he is right. And I have voted for it 3 times in the past because I think the logic is there and the point you made up. So it's not that; it's more of that it's building that consensus. I think it's possible around this one because I do agree with where you gentleman from Alabama was at. That I think your logic and as you walked it through it, it's very hard for me to say that veteran should be denied.
I just can't imagine going before a federal judge and saying, Judge, it's complex. And we haven't done, because it's complex, we haven't recognized the constitutional rights of these citizens of this country. I don't think that a judge is going to accept that. They're going to say these people have this right. You've not given them the due process that's required under the Constitution before you can deprive them of this right, and therefore you're in violation of the Constitution, and we're going to enjoin you from doing it. Rather than get to that point, let's just give them the adjudicatory process, and that's all this is. It's pretty simple. I mean, frankly, I don't think this is that complex. Are you going to give them adjudicated rights or not? And it sounds like the VA says no, and what the bill says is yes, we're going to give them adjudicated rights, and we all know how to do this. This is not something we haven't done many times before. If I may yield to the gentleman from Georgia for just a second, because I know he wanted to raise something.
And I just want to pick back up on this, because I agree with what's happening here, and this will more than likely lose it in its safe up, and it is complicated. So my question is, why would the VA do this and currently take rights away and actually are harming people at this point? This is almost like, in some ways, a congressional injunction here. We're saying you shouldn't have done this anyway. You're overstepping here. And this is where we're coming into and saying, because all the points are right. Sorry, you're right about that. But the question comes back to this body and protection of rights. Let's make it right, because the VA is doing it in a way that is not going to stand up. And we also understand that there's concern everywhere. The best part about this is there is hope, and I appreciate what you said, and I think the chairman said as well. We want to make better. We don't want this in a sense. But I think the way that we went about this is exactly talking about the congressional process. Well, let's talk about an agency. You want to get under a real pet peeve of mine is agencies acting like Congress people. If they want to run for office, put the money down and run. Make policy. Don't do it from a cubicle against the setup. So I think we've hit it, and I appreciate the gentleman from Alabama stating that, and I think we're moving forward on the same basis. Let's just stop the damage that is currently in place. I yield back.
I want to, yes, sir. Dr. O, you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. Just a couple of things. First, the 21st Century Cures Act just codifies what the VA is doing. And I did some research this weekend, Mr. Byrne, on the risks that someone who has a fiduciary, whether they might harm themselves or society.
Right.
And they actually are incarcerated at a slightly lower rate than the veteran population as a whole is. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't hold water, the letter that people that I have great respect for wrote, signed. And lastly, to show you how the VA does, a veteran who's 100% disabled for PTSD is not automatically appointed a fiduciary. Think about that. And even though the symptoms required for that rating include suicidal or homicidal ideation, we don't give them a fiduciary. We don't take their Second Amendment right away, and yet someone can come in that can't balance their checkbook, and we take it away. I think we lose, too. I agree. I yield back.
Well, I appreciate both of you. I know that you care deeply about this and you're working hard on this. 70% of the casework in my district office is with the Veterans Administration. Partly that's a function of the fact we have a lot of veterans in my district, but I think it's also a function of the fact we've got a lot of problems with the Veterans Administration. And I wish that they were concentrating more on the appeals of my constituents, on getting my constituents the health care that they need, than by hauling off and doing something like this that looks like it was poorly thought out from a judicial point of view. So I appreciate this effort to rectify that. I also appreciate what you're trying to do with the other bill. I heard some of the stuff that was said earlier. I just want to be able to look my veterans in the eye and say, we care at least as much about you and your needs that aren't getting met by the VA as we do about all these granular statutory protections for VA employees who aren't getting the job done for our constituents who deserve the best instead of what they're getting right now. So I appreciate all the hard work you and your committee have done. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Windsor, Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To clarify something, I did prosecute for 25 years. Title 18, Section United States Code 922G lists the factors that prohibit an individual from possessing a firearm. Those very same factors are used in the NICS criteria to purchase a firearm. So if you can't possess a firearm, you can't purchase a firearm. So it is the statutory provisions that are then used under the regulations to prohibit the purchase of a firearm. So if you are prohibited from purchasing a firearm, those same factors are used to arrest you and prosecute you for possessing a firearm. So I've had many cases, and actually the sentencing guidelines have a decrease in the punishment for many cases where people that have been prohibited from possessing a firearm for things like tax fraud or something that's unrelated to a propensity for violence are arrested because they're out hunting birds with a grandchild. And it really is a problem. And I hope that we at some point in this pretty volatile area reach some common sense understandings on what is likely to lead to violence in the future and what is not likely. And in this case, I think it's really important that we give our veterans, the people who have sacrificed the most for our country, the adjudication that they are entitled to before we take any kind of rights away from them. And I also, I'm happy to hear that my friend from Colorado is part of a bill that recognizes that just because someone has been convicted of a felony for distributing marijuana does not mean that they have a propensity to commit a violent crime. Certainly as a prosecutor, the last person I wanted to see with a weapon of any kind, a knife or a gun, is somebody that has committed a violent crime, someone that's committed murder, rape, robbery. I want those guns kept away from those people, but I can't tell you how many times as a district attorney I had people come into my office and say, 40 years ago when I was in college, I passed a bad check, I took a felony, it was a no-time felony. Now 40 years later, I want to go hunting with my grandchild, I can't do it because I'm a felon. And there's no relationship between the crime that they committed 40 years ago and the likelihood that they're going to commit a violent crime. So I hope we move forward. I think this bill is a great example of how to be fair to people, how to respect the Second Amendment, just like we do the First Amendment and other amendments. We are in a process now of trying to return to felons the right to vote in various states. We should at least respect a constitutional right like the Second Amendment as much as we do so many other rights. And I commend the committee for bringing this bill forward, and I look forward to supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You go back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you very much. Is there any other member that would seek to engage the witnesses that we have? I want to thank both of you for being here. I think, as always, it's most instructive on us of the type of deliberation questions that you get into with the with your committee work, and perhaps more importantly, to make progress on behalf of our veterans at a time when maybe they cannot speak so eloquently for themselves. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Even though
Appreciate it
I
very
was an officer in the 2nd Infantry Division, I still saluted the sergeant major first.
Well, and we still do, sir. If you'll please remember that we have an awesome stenographer who needs whatever you brought in writing to help her complete the record, which is most important, and she's right here, this young woman right here. If you'll just leave it for her, anything you brought in writing, thank you very much. We now will move to the second panel, remembering that we're on H.R. 1259 and H.R. 1181. Elizabeth, we're going to have you come up, and Mark, I've seen you both sitting here with great interest of the opportunity to see the things that we're doing, and we will then move next to the gentleman, Dr. Winstrom, when we move to H.R. 1367. Mark, please, Elizabeth, if you'll please come up and take the witness chair. Both of you have seen the thoughtful debate that has taken place today, and I understand that some of you are engaged in some emotional issues that might be related to this issue, and we're delighted, quite honestly, that both of you are here. If you'll please remember, our stenographer would appreciate anything you have in writing that you'll leave for her. The gentlewoman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. And to Mr. Cole, my father was the one who bounced the quarters off the beds. That's that Navy training. So we were not allowed breakfast until we made our beds. So that training dies hard. Mr. Chairman, I'm opposed to the closed rule on H.R. 1181. And that's part of, I think there was some confusion about, I know there's an open rule on the accountability and an agreement of you, and I want to thank you for that, for considering and being, including Ranking Member Waltz's amendment as part of that discussion. And I think that will improve our final product on accountability. But on 1181, it's a closed rule. And I had offered in committee that we ask for a GAO study to see what, in fact, is the impact, and that's been quite heated here and quite passionate, because we all share a commitment to ensuring that our veterans are served, that their rights are protected, but that also we deal with this epidemic of veteran suicide. I think that the truth is, and I know the Chairman Rowe and I have talked already today, he had breakfast with the Secretary, and I had pre-lunch with the Secretary, talking about the initiatives we need to undertake, some of them in Congress, some of them in the VA internally, and some working with our veterans service organizations and others. But frankly, we did not have a hearing on this. I'm new to the committee, but I've been working on these issues a lot in my district. And there was not clear information we heard right here in the discussion in the previous panel about how the NICS system operates. I'd like to just clarify a couple of things, which I think will help. And I'm asking for an open rule that my amendment be made in order. But just to sort of illustrate why it's important that we work this in committee, frankly, and why we should have a study. The process in place right now has been in place for 20 years, nearly 20 years. The VA has been reporting to the NICS system names of veterans who have been determined to need a fiduciary. I'm in agreement with the chairman and with everybody in this room that that list is over-inclusive right now. However, there are tens of thousands and roughly probably 100,000 people of the 170,000 names on that list are people who have serious mental health diagnoses, issues like PTSD, severe depression, dementia, schizophrenia. And the concern that I expressed to the chairman in the meeting, in our markup, was that the intersection of this bill, if it were to pass, 1181, with the 2007 NICS Improvement Act, which was passed in the wake of the Virginia Tech shootings, the intersection of those two, I firmly believe, and many lawyers believe, would lead to the VA, either under lawsuit or otherwise, deciding that they would release all those names and report to the NICS system. All of those names should be removed. There's a different process in place now. And if you think about the fact that to date now, when people are making those fiduciary determinations, part of that process may be a serious mental diagnosis that in fact could endanger the life and health of that veteran or their loved ones. And so I am deeply concerned that that would be an unintended consequence, but could easily happen. That's why I think we really do need a hearing. I shared that concern with the Secretary, shared that with my colleagues. I think this is one in which to meet our commitment to the men and women who have served this country. We need to go about this carefully, but it has been in place for 20 years. This is what's been happening for 20 years. And I couldn't agree more with my former hallmate, Mr. Collins, that the mentally defective language is offensive and needs to change. That is also 20 years old. And we should, in a bipartisan way, push the Judiciary Committee to change that language. But again, this underscores for this committee the importance of having an open rule. And frankly, I would hope to get your support to effectively send this back to committee so in a bipartisan way we can reach the consensus to deal with these serious issues, save the lives of veterans, protect communities, and address some of these other issues that are totally inappropriate to label anyone, much less somebody who's worn the uniform in this country, should not be labeled as mentally defective. That's offensive and wrong. But we do have a problem now. And so to Mr. Collins' assertion about the letters from General McChrystal and others, it's that second part, Mr. Chairman, that they're worried about, the release of those 170,000 names being removed from the list without any process in place, any ability to look at that. And that is deeply concerning because there are tens of thousands on that list who, people who evaluated them within the VA are aware that there are concerns. And so that's why I come here today in opposition to the closed rule, would like my amendment for a GAO study to really look at what happened with our 21st century cures, carefully crafted, bipartisan due process that we put in place, and also really look more broadly at what we can do about the names already on the list. And that's why I ask for your consideration to reconsider and have an open rule and make my amendment in order. And again, we all share the same purpose, which is to support and protect our veterans and to address military suicide in a much more comprehensive way. And I believe an open rule would be a first step towards that process. Again, I thank you all very much and happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kano, welcome to the Rules Committee. We're delighted that you're back. The gentleman's recognized. Gentleman may need to make sure that, there you go. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've submitted two amendments to the VA Accountability First Act. I would ask that the Rules Committee accept them and find them in order. The first amendment is in the nature of a substitute, and that would strike the text of H.R. 1259 and insert a new provision that would allow the Secretary to suspend without pay any VA employee whose performance or misconduct threatens the public safety, public health or safety, including the health and safety of veterans. It would also further give the Secretary the authority to remove a suspended employee after an investigation and review if the Secretary determines removal is in the interest of public health and safety. Now, both sides of the aisle agree and share a desire to protect veterans from mistreatment or harm, especially when they are seeking medical care at a VA facility. But the language in my amendment would more likely than not achieve the majority's stated outcome of removing VA employees whose misconduct harms veterans. My second amendment focuses on restoring the right of employees appointed under Title V to use collectively bargained grievance procedures. Now, collectively bargained grievance settlement procedures often lead to quicker and more simpler solutions, in addition to the added protections they give to potential whistleblowers. Reforming and improving the VA won't happen if our only solution is to make it easier to fire employees. We need to create a culture of excellence that focuses on improving training and management. Now, even the co-chairs of the Bipartisan Commission on Care that we established through the Choice Act, both these co-chairs, one a Republican, one a Democrat, led large private sector healthcare organizations. They testified before the Veterans Affairs Committee that they were shocked by how little was invested in training and management at the VA. And this was in the context of accountability. If we continue to focus solely on making it easier to fire VA employees and not making the VA a great place to work, we will continue to struggle to recruit the talented folks that we need to put in place to take care of our nation's veterans. The bill, as is currently offered, also doesn't do enough to protect whistleblowers. It doesn't offer enough time for an employee to get their case together, to file an appeal. And it undermines collective bargaining agreements negotiated in good faith between management and employees. And when these two basic protections are undermined, we give way, way too much power to managers whose goal may be to retaliate against someone who's called out a mistake. These basic civil protections are in place to allow employees to speak difficult truths and these employees will know that they'll have a fair shot to defend themselves if they face retaliation. And we all know that some of the scandals that were uncovered were because of employees willing to come forward and speak these difficult truths. It would be a shame if they didn't come forward because of enhanced ability of supervisors to retaliate against them. Now, my amendments address our shared goal of removing VA employees that are a threat to the health and safety of our veterans without undermining basic worker protections that help the VA recruit talent and protect whistleblowers. I hope that this committee will accept my amendments and allow them to receive a vote on the floor, and we'll be able to discuss them.
Thank you very much. The bill that is before us that has been discussed, H.R. 1181, is a one-page and four-line bill. And notwithstanding, I am not the person that vets bills before they get here in terms of how inclusive they are, the scope or nature. I look at them as they are. I recognize the dissent that is within the document, the public document that was provided to us, of the views of the report from the committee with dissenting views. There is a statement that is made that directly discusses why you're here today. And I quote from the report on page 9. We have serious concerns over H.R. 1181. Excuse me. We believe this legislation in practice would instantly remove all individual previously determined to be mentally incompetent by the Department of Veterans Affairs. I don't think any testimony addressed that issue at all. I see nothing in this legislation that addresses that, and I would view this as a moving forward document law, not one where we went back and retroactively addressed this. Perhaps part of the performance that we have seen by the committee today, in their wisdom and the wisdom of the people who've been here, have been to carefully analyze these questions and to ask the committee if they would be participatory in that endeavor. I just want you to know that I do recognize what you're saying. And I would have thought and hoped that this could have been perhaps clarified in some way, but I do not believe that it has been. And I will take this as the document that it is, the one page and 4 lines, and I do not see where that is addressed. So I appreciate it. I will respectfully confer with not only the ranking member, but also the chairman of the committee in further deliberation as we would have. But I want you to know that I'm trying to address the issue, and you're entitled to your opinion of what it might do. And I'm entitled, in my opinion, to read the 1 page and 4 lines, and I did not read that, nor would I believe in any way that from my experience as a member of Congress, that that would be the outcome. But I think it should be addressed, and I appreciate and respect both of you for being here. Mr. Chairman? No question. Gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm just listening to what you just said. The reason why you didn't see any testimony was because there was no hearings on this issue. And Ms. Esty brought up, I think, a concern that I think ought to be addressed, and that is maybe one of the unintended consequences of this, albeit a short bill, could be pretty significant. I don't know the answer to that, but it's a serious enough question that I think, that it should have been addressed in a hearing, not in the Rules Committee hearing, but in, the Committee of Jurisdiction. I don't know whether you would like to add anything, Ms. Esty, but I mean, I'm just, that's one of the reasons we're saying there should be hearings, we should have regular orders so that we don't come to the Rules Committee and can't get answers to questions, and we all speculate about what this could mean or what it might not mean, when none of us really know, because the people who really...
Gentleman, yield.
Yeah, I'm happy to yield.
Your opinion is only as important, and mine is no more important, and yours is not more important than me. I'm giving you credit for what you're saying, but what I'm suggesting to you is that this is a solely rifle shot. It does not address those that exist in NICS today. It does not address retroactively. It is a moving forward.
Well,
and I do know we have a gentleman that has a federal judge. He would need to adjudicate these. I do believe the gentleman's right, but all I'm saying to our witnesses is this is a moving forward prospectus. It does not address.
I thank the gentleman. And let me yield to Ms. Esty. Maybe you can help clarify why there was some concern that this might have a retroactive impact.
Absolutely. Thank the gentleman for yielding, and thank you for the question.
Yes, ma'am.
I did pose that question to the chairman, and I fully believe his intent is to have it be prospective. The concern that I raised in my testimony, however, which is shared by many people who actively are looking at legislation in this general field, is the intersection between that one-page bill and the 2007 NICS Improvement Act, which charges agencies with updating the NICS system with any changes that they make. So that has led many lawyers who've looked at this said, the intersection of this bill, that would be a new policy and change for the VA going forward, and could well empower or in fact require them to say that would then require updating, that is then removal from the NICS system, those who did not go through that new process. That would be a perfectly reasonable interpretation for the VA to take if it wanted to, or if it was pressed to. And it's really the intersection of those two. So you're right, on the four corners of the bill itself, I did ask for changes to make clear in language that it was not. I did not get help in doing that. So I remain concerned because of the intersection with this other act that previous Congresses passed, not that long ago, but 10 years ago, requiring agencies in part to do that updating. The intersection of those two leaves an ambiguity that I think would be better resolved with a bill that had one or two more sentences making absolutely clear that it was prospective. Unfortunately, again, because we did not have a hearing, we weren't allowed to have witnesses come in and testify and really work towards a standard. And frankly, to the folks here, again, this is Rules Committee, we really ought to be doing this in committee. I think we all share a desire to have appropriate standards being used. A fiduciary for financial purposes is very different than what might be appropriate for not owning, purchasing, or possessing firearms. But those two things may overlap. And that is currently, it is that overlap category that raised the concern of the generals and many of the others of us, which I think none of us would want wholesale removal of restrictions from those who we would all think would be generally a risk to themselves and others. And we're trying to all get to the same place. I think that would be better done if we had time to consider in committee. And that is really my plea overall. Again, you have your job as the Rules Committee. We all have our jobs as member of Congress to support veterans and get to a better place, both for those who have been placed on the next list when perhaps they shouldn't be, as well as who might in the future. But we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater on this, and that's my concern about where we are
And
here.
I just close by saying, one of the jobs of the Rules Committee is to make amendments in order. So I hope we can make your amendment in order and others, and Mr. Tucano, I hope we can make your amendments in order as well. Yield back.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you very much. I don't often do this, but I'd like to ask a question, so I'm going to yield myself because of the nature of what we're talking about. Let's suppose that maybe they're perhaps looking at it should have been a hearing on moving forward. I definitely think there should be a hearing if we were going to do anything about people sitting in the database. You don't have to agree with that, but I do believe there should have been, would be a hearing if we were to address those that sat in the database now as opposed to moving forward. So we're not trying to justify whatever we might deal with your amendment, but I do agree that that would be true. Judge Hastings, did we give you a chance to ask questions?
You did, and I have
Okay.
no questions, but I support both amendments. Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that very much. And these are thoughtful ideas that are, I think, wandering this committee, and thank you very much. Is there any other?
I want to ask the gentlewoman a couple of questions. I assume you agree that veterans have Second Amendment rights. Do you think that they can constitutionally be deprived of those rights without an adjudication that they are a danger to themselves or others?
I thank the gentleman for his question. That has been the practice of the VA for 20 years.
But do you think
in
that's
this.
constitutional?
I'm surprised, frankly, that that hasn't been challenged before now. For all the reasons we're discussing here
But
today.
do you think it's constitutional that
I
they
think
do that?
every person, veteran or otherwise, has Second Amendment rights, and there are, as the former prosecutor outlined, this is all based on very clear criteria about who is allowed to possess.
Suppose they're on this list and they haven't been adjudicated. Do they have a constitutional right not to be on the list if they haven't been adjudicated?
And they've been trying to do that process, and I will say that in the 21st Century Cures Bill, there is a provision to try to beef up the appeals process, which is there, but it has, in fact, not really been successful. It's been very hard for veterans who are on that list. So we need a process to get people adjudicated and determined in some fashion, and we don't have that now. We don't have that now.
Is it a constitutional right to the adjudication?
It's we can go look at Justice Scalia's decision in the Heller case, which does note that there are restrictions on the Second Amendment that do have to do with
Without an
safety.
adjudication, though.
But most of these have been
Can you
with
decide that
adjudication.
I don't have, that I'm an exception to the Second Amendment without adjudicating me as being someone that's a threat to themselves or somebody else?
In other categories, we've not done it, and that's where veterans have been unique in this, and I think that's why we're all in agreement that there needs to be a process, but again.
I'm not aware of any case where you've drawn that exception and individually by individually, they haven't been given a due process right through an adjudication proceeding. Are you aware of any? Other than this one?
I'm not, which is why it's kind of remarkable that for 20 years this has been the case. But let's also be clear, this doesn't really set up a procedure. It calls that there be one, but it doesn't set one up. And I think I do think that's what we should be setting up. Actually, we should be setting up, and again, this is where we would benefit from in committee, really trying to flesh this out.
What your bill does is it essentially takes everything out of the overriding bill, the underlying bill, and puts in its place a study. So you would say, stop, don't do anything until we've had this study that's in your bill, right?
And the procedure that in 21st Century Cures, that there was a discussion to enhance and clarify the due process rights as part of 21st Century Cures that was negotiated between the Senate and the House
Are you saying
3 months ago.
Do you think the 21st Century Cures statute provides the constitutional due process protections that veterans have under the Second Amendment?
It is supposed to be addressing the VA. There's actually a provision that
You think
addresses the VA.
you think it adequately does that for purposes of protecting their Second Amendment rights?
It's addressed to that. That's why we should have a hearing to see if it is doing that. And I hear by the tone of your question that you may doubt that it does that.
Well,
but I think we should have a hearing to actually see, is it doing that? Is that an adequate procedure? Is it? I don't know.
I've certainly heard a lot about hearings, but if you have a right that right needs to be adjudicated before it's taken away from you. So if they have a right, give them the adjudication. And they shouldn't have to have a congressional act to tell them that. But we've got the Veterans Administration going the other direction, so we have to have a congressional act to tell the Veterans Administration to do what I think the Constitution requires them to do. Your other point is, well, if you do that, then that calls into question thousands of names that are on the list. Well, if they're not there appropriately under the Constitution in the first place, aren't they in question under the Constitution and subject to a challenging court case anyway?
They may be. And but the issue is in part about that health and safety of veterans and their loved ones, which is why the VA presumably 20 years ago began this process of trying to do this. So I think what we're seeing all the way around is we need to look at this process. We really do, and we know more things and we know different things now in a process that was put in place or non-processed 20 years ago should be looked at hard and should be redone in some fashion, both prospectively as well as retrospectively. And particularly, people raised issues about felons. I mean, and that includes some of our veterans too. We have issues about dishonorable discharge. So there are a lot of complexity around this, and I think we all want to do right by our veterans as well as keep people safe. And it needs a much more extensive deep dive, I think, to get it right. And that's really my concern now, is to get that genuine bipartisan deep dive, to work with the Veterans Administration, with the VSOs, and with physicians and community members to get this right in a respectful way. And I'm afraid the way of doing this will seem like we've done some things but caused other problems and might take, frankly, our foot off the pedal of doing this more comprehensive that we really should be doing. And I don't want it to end with that.
The one thing that is clearly bipartisan, Mr. Chairman, is that we all agree that these veterans have Second Amendment rights and that they're entitled to an adjudication before they're denied those rights. The only question is whether we recognize that they have those rights today or we do it later. And whether we recognize them today or later, they have them today. It's the Veterans Administration that has acted to take them away. And it's a shame that we're having to do anything. And I yield back.
Gentleman, just extend, thank you very much. Is there any other member of the committee that would seek time? I want to thank both of you for being here. I think that these are appropriate questions that you've raised. I think we are trying to respectfully acknowledge your viewpoint of further clarification, and I appreciate both of you taking time to be here today. If you please make sure you leave anything you brought right for the Rossum Stockford, we appreciate it very much. Is there any other member that would seek to give testimony before the Rules Committee on H.R. 1259, VA Accountability for the First Act of 2017, or H.R. 1181, Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of that, and we will now open up the hearing portion for H.R. 1367. I notice the gentleman, Dr. Winstrom, is here. I notice the gentleman, Mr. Waltz, is still here, and we appreciate both of you not only continuing with your time this afternoon to the needs of the committee, but for your thoughtful and interesting dialogue that will take place. Dr. Winstrom, I want to thank you for taking time to be here. If you'll please remember anything you brought in writing for Rossum Stockford, she would appreciate it, and I would too. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. McGovern. Thank you for being with us today, and us being with you and the committee as well, and giving me the opportunity to testify on my bill, H.R. 1367. I'll keep my comments short so that we can quickly get to your questions. The Department of Veterans Affairs cannot fulfill its important mission of caring for and serving our nation's veterans without a robust workforce of high-performing employees. Unfortunately, VA has often struggled to recruit and retain the employees it needs, as evidenced by Secretary Shulkin's testimony at his confirmation hearing last month that the Veterans Health Administration alone currently has 45,000 vacant positions across the country. To help ensure those and all other vacancies are filled, H.R. 1367 would strengthen VA's ability to identify staffing shortages and to recruit, retain, and quickly bring on board high-quality employees. I've submitted a manager's amendment that would make some minor and technical changes to the reported version of the bill to reduce discretionary costs while preserving the overall goal of improving VA's recruitment and retention capabilities. The amended version of 1367 would modify the annual determination of VHA staffing shortages to include 5 clinical and 5 non-clinical occupations within each VA medical center, establish an executive management fellowship program, modify the service requirement to receive veterans' preference for reservists and guardsmen from 180 days of consecutive active duty service to 180 days of cumulative active duty service, and expand those considered preference eligible to include all retired service members. Allow VA to non-competitively reappoint a former employee to a position not more than 1 grade higher than their former position. Require annual performance plans for VA political appointees. Require a Government Accountability Office study on VA succession planning, and require VA to establish a recruiting database for mission-critical positions. Allow for accepted service appointments for students and recent graduates. Improve training for VHA human resources professionals. To develop and carry out a standardized exit survey process, and to establish a promotional track for technical experts. While more work remains to be done to shorten and improve VA's overly bureaucratic and lengthy hiring process, I firmly believe that enactment of this legislation would result in more robust, capable, and highly trained workforce to benefit America's veterans, and I hope each of you will join me in supporting it. I thank you all once again for inviting me to testify today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Doctor, thank you very much. Ms. Waltz, once again, welcome. It's your day at the committee. Gentlemen, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here in support of Dr. Remstrup's bill. Dr. Wenstrup is an incredibly important member of the committee. I have watched him add his expertise both as a physician, as a colonel in the United States Army, and as a very thoughtful, I think, systems manager when I watch him try and understand what's working and what's not. I very much appreciate he brings things like this, which hits right at the point I was making earlier, the other side of accountability. Make sure we get the good people there, make sure we keep them, make sure we get them hired in a timely manner. So I rise in support of this. The only thing I would ask, Mr. Chairman, is for the committee to take a look at some of the improving amendments from Mr. Hastings, from Mr. Lynch, Mr. Schrader, and Mr. Moulton. Give them your consideration, as you always do, to improve on an already very good piece of legislation. And again, I thank Dr. Wenstrup for bringing this forward, making significant moves in the right direction, and that's what you asked for. It's incremental at the VA, and as everybody says, it's what we do a lot of in our offices. It's the second largest piece of the federal government, so it's going to have a piece of that. I would say and had mentioned that it's 23rd out of 26 in terms of very hardworking staff that are sitting behind us. They do a ton of work with a pretty small piece of the pie for a pretty large and important piece of our constituency as our veterans. So I hope we can give these considerations, and I fully support Dr. Wenstrup.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you, and your words of support for our professional staff that is engaged in these issues should not go unnoticed. Their not only professional demeanor, but their advice about direction of the day-to-day operational needs is to be commended. We attempt up here at least once every 4 or 5 years to thank our staff for the work that they do. Come on, guys. Maybe every 4 or 5 years. We try and do it often. We so many times take for granted the hard work of our staffs, and we should not, and I thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I'm good. Tom? No questions. Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. And Colonel Wenstrup, if I could just ask you, and I do appreciate your attention to this, and I think it's extremely important. When I have talked to the people at the Dallas VA, my Denton outpatient clinic, the Fort Worth outpatient clinic when that was part of the district, one of the problems that continually came up was retention because the salaries were not private sector could compete aggressively for those VA employees. So what is there in this that will help the VA be more competitive with the hiring or retention of their physician workforce?
Well, thank you, Dr. Burgess. I appreciate that. One of the things that we have found is there are many doctors who want to treat veterans, regardless of lower pay. But the biggest hassle they have is going through the process and being able to compete with the outside sector as far as that goes. So this does give greater opportunity to recruit and retain, one, by reducing the process and making it more available to get good people in. But pay increases have been part of it too. Now, we also dealt with the hiring freeze, and that has been taken care of as well to bring people in. But pay has been of concern in some specialties, for example, podiatry. Podiatry is a field that's in great need in healthcare. We have a bill coming later on that because their pay is so much lower because they're not included in physicians and surgeons in the VA as they are in the private sector. And so the efforts are being made to make it easier to be credentialed, and we'll talk about that, but this is one of the first steps in making the process easier so that it's more enjoyable to even engage in trying to work at the VA.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
I just want to say thank you. I look forward to supporting the bill. I'd like to support the rule, and that depends on whether these amendments are made in order. So thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Judge Hastings?
Thank you very much, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman. I support the amendment. I do have one question, Dr. Wenstrup. Would you repeat for me the language that you put in the record regarding grade and increase? You could only, I didn't understand it, and I really am asking for information.
Are you talking about?
In your testimony, you asserted that a person could not move up but one grade
That is on a rehire.
on a rehire.
Yes, sir. So then if someone has left the VA and they're being brought back in, they can only be directly appointed to a position one grade higher, but they can compete for higher grades.
All right, that was what I didn't understand, but so that clears it for me. I support the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just also like to thank the witnesses for your work on this issue, for your dedication to making sure that our veterans are cared for. And I have one question in terms of the hiring and our ability to make sure that we're recruiting and having the ability to reach out and ensure that these positions are filled. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're facing in rural states like Wyoming in particular, and how this bill might help us in terms of recruitment in rural areas?
Well, one, again, like I said before, as far as going through the process, not necessarily with this bill, but other areas that we're reaching out in areas like Wyoming is through telemedicine, so that we can have some of the best providers of care that can be anywhere in the country to participate in the care for our patients. Now, that's not particularly in this bill, but that's been expanding in the VA. And actually, from what I've been able to observe, the VA has been one of the best at putting this in place around the country. Because actually, physically getting every specialty to every part of the country is extremely challenging. So that's really coming from other venues. And then as we work going forward with the Choice Act, I think that we're going to have greater opportunity to engage more physicians that aren't necessarily full-time VA physicians, but become part of the VA system to provide care in more rural areas especially. Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, address the gentlelady's question. I very much associate myself with these challenges of rural areas, both in the private sector and in coming from a more rural area. I think Dr. Wenstrup is right that it's in the piece of legislation that have been coming. If we go back to last year, the Clay Hunt Suicide Act addressed the issue of shortage of psychiatrists, and the way we did that, we incentivized it with some help to help pay for the college and the education expenses that came with it. If you're willing to serve in the VA for a certain amount of time, there was some incentives there to do that. And I think we need to think about that because it becomes a real challenge, because we do know that while 15% of the country is classified as rural, upwards of 40% of our warriors come from those areas. So there's a disproportionately large number in those areas with a shortage both in the private sector and in the VA of those very folks. And I think Dr. Wenstrup's right. You know, telemedicine can do some of it, but there could be other incentives that we should continue to look at. We certainly welcome your input.
And I would just like to say that I think Mr. Walls would agree that on this committee, we have a great opportunity to work very well together in so many ways. But I think that we're also very well represented in the committee by people that have firsthand knowledge and witnessing of what takes place in rural areas. So that representation, I think, is present on the committee and doesn't go unnoticed.
Great. Well, thank you. I thank both my colleagues for their attention to, in particular, this issue. As you noted, the per capita service from rural areas is higher than in many other parts of the nation. And I think that, Mr. Chairman, it's also just been, I think, very important and a real signal to see the bipartisan
remarks for her convenience. And I believe we have two more members to testify. Mr. Lynch, you're recognized. Please come to the table. Mr. Hastings, would you care to testify from here, or certainly wherever the gentleman would care to testify?
I'd like to offer my statement in the record in support of my amendment.
Okay. First of all, I support Dr. Wenstrup's legislation and its goal of enhancing the retention and recruitment of a strong workforce to serve America's veterans at the Department of Veteran Affairs. However, I also believe that H.R. 1367 provides us with a key opportunity to address an immediate threat facing our veterans community, and that is the devastating impact that the government-wide federal hiring freeze ordered by President Trump is having on veterans' employment and services. In order to mitigate the negative consequences of the hiring freeze on America's veterans and the sacred mission of the VA, I respectfully offer the following amendments to H.R. 1367. Firstly, I have an amendment allowing all federal agencies and department heads to hire qualified veterans for open positions. We just heard from the bill's sponsor that we have 45,000 vacancies, and that would happen notwithstanding the hiring freeze. This amendment mirrors legislation that I've introduced in the House, H.R. 1001, the Veterans Hiring Protection Act, which now has over 30 co-sponsors. Secondly, I have an amendment allowing the Secretary of the VA to hire veterans, notwithstanding the hiring freeze. I also have an amendment requiring the Secretary of the VA to report to Congress on the impact of the hiring freeze on veterans' employment, including contracting out to private contractors. That has been the practice in the two previous hiring freeze that we had under President Reagan and under President Carter, that while we put a hiring freeze on government employees, the agencies just went around them and hired private contractors, and actually it was more expensive to do that than just hire federal employees. The report would also inquire as to what steps the agency is taking to assist veterans whose job applications and job offers are now on hold. Fourth, I have an amendment requiring the Secretary of the VA to report to Congress on the positions that cannot be filled at the VA due to the hiring freeze. There are some exemptions under the current freeze for the health care side of the VA. However, on the benefits side, there are no exemptions, so we're going to see the time frame for those veterans for their appointments and approval of benefits continue to be extended. I would underscore that Americans veterans currently represent about 31% of our federal workforce nationwide. That's about 624,000 veterans out of a workforce of 2 million federal employees. And according to the OPM, veterans currently employed in the federal government do not only include an estimated 120,000 employees at the VA, but also 320,000 employees at the Department of Defense, 52,000 employees at the Department of Homeland Security, and more than 130,000 employees at other federal agencies. Moreover, an estimated 243,000 veterans in the federal workforce are disabled veterans. including nearly 147,000 veterans in our federal workforce with a disability rating of over 30%. Veterans' employment in the federal government has also risen considerably in recent years, and while the federal agency general hiring percentage is about 28.3%, 5 years ago, as of 5 years ago, the federal government hired over 71,000 veterans last year, a lot of those Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, and that increased our new hire percentage in the federal workforce to 32.5%. Our new federal employees include over 31,000 disabled veterans and more than 21,000 who have a disability rating of over 30% or greater. Clearly, the hiring freeze that is now in place has indefinitely halted the progress that we have made in ensuring that those who have served in defense of our nation and that they receive opportunities to transition to civilian life. Look, we've got an elevated suicide rate among our returning veterans. I think we all know that. We've got increased problems with drug addiction, substance abuse. So there's a real challenge here transitioning them back to civilian life. And here we have, you know, an opportunity to put them to work, which really, for a lot of these veterans, is the ball game. You get them in a decent job, get them back in a regular routine. Those other problems, you know, the suicide and the substance abuse, those will be decreased. So as ranking member of the House Oversight Subcommittee on National Security, I just also want to note that our committee recently received testimony from the VA itself indicating that the hiring freeze is preventing the agency from filling critical vacancies. In particular, the acting director of Labor Management Relations at the VA, Ms. Kimberly McLeod, testified last month that there are more than 9,000 jobs serving critical functions at the VA Health Administration that remain unfilled due to the hiring freeze. So we're not giving the services to our veterans who are returning, and we're not letting veterans coming home actually go to work. Look, I appreciate all the courtesies that has been extended to me today. I thank you for your consideration of these amendments, and I respectfully request that the committee waive any points of order that may lie against them, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
We appreciate the gentleman's amendments, and just let me note for the record, the case he makes very eloquently on the hiring freeze could apply in a lot of other areas. I actually have legislation myself pending where depot maintenance is concerned. You have an opportunity to hire skilled people, and we have exactly the same problems, probably worse in Indian Health Service hospitals that we have in veterans facilities when it comes to getting qualified doctors and nurses. So my friend makes a very important point.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The gentleman from Texas recognized. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony. I support all his amendments.
I support the amendments.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Alabama. Gentlelady from Wyoming. Gentleman's excused, and the chairman arrives magically just at the appropriate moment to resume control of the hearing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma and the gentleman from Massachusetts, and I'm assuming that we had allowed the gentleman from Florida time to discuss his amendment. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, would it be?
Yes, sir.
Would it be appropriate for me to make an inquiry about another matter separate from this bill at this point, or should I wait till after the?
You may do as the gentleman chooses. Otherwise, I'm going to move to the motion. If the gentleman wish to ask a question, we've closed the hearing portion of the HR 1367. The gentleman is.
And this is pertaining to the health care repeal bill. You know, we had this discussion about the White House press secretary last week, and I hate to inform you, but he apparently struck again. At this yesterday's White House briefing, you know, let me remember last week he told us that there would be an open amendment process. And footnote here, some of your members on the Republican side seem to support that. I saw Congressman Jim Jordan say that he thought that we should have an open rule. But back to Mr. Spicer. I don't think the press secretary heard the chairman's admonition to, quote, stay in his lane, because we got an update from him on what our rule might look like. And yesterday he said, and I quote, that there will be a manager's amendment. And when he was asked about the White House involvement in shaping a, quote, major and significant manager's amendment, and whether Speaker Ryan knows about the amendment. Mr. Spicer answered, and I quote, "I think Speaker Ryan is well aware of the manager's amendment. We are obviously in talks with House leadership about the contents." And given that, Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple of questions. And the first one is, will there be any official announcements from this committee, the Rules Committee, about the amendment process for the repeal bill? Because so far we've only heard about the rule from the White House press secretary. I mean, will there be an open rule as the White House has promised? And if not, will there at least be an amendment deadline announcement?
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the gentleman asking. These are all pertinent questions, literally to every single member of this body. What I would suggest to you is that there will be an announcement. The announcement will be made soon. We are attempting to reasonably understand what the snow delay gave us. It was, I will tell you, originally scheduled for early in the week. I would anticipate it would slip no more than a day in that endeavor. And so probably as early as we begin the development towards the hearing that will take place in the Budget Committee, that once they put together their bill and they know what that looks like, and that they have had a chance to assemble it, and we believe we are on a pathway, then I would then, in working with the gentlewoman, Mrs. Black, would then make a determination about when we were going to do that. They have not completed their work yet.
But the announcement that you would make, would it be about an amendment deadline? So you would be requesting for people to submit amendments to this committee? Would that be what, that's the announcement I'm wondering whether will come out of this committee, I mean, versus just an announcement that we're going to meet to report out a bill?
Well, I'm sure that I would advise members that they would expect that we would have a meeting, and that if they would choose to allow that I will know at the time I do that. I will tell you, not surprisingly, we're receiving a lot of feedback about what the rule ought to look like, an amendment process ought to look like, or a manager's amendment. And I would say as soon as we know that Mrs. Black has completed her work and prepared through that process, I will have a better idea about how to respond.
So I think, is it fair to conclude that it might be possible that no amendments would be made in order? That might be a possibility?
Oh, I think it might be.
All right. Well, let me ask you another question. Given the fact...
But that should not deter anybody, nor did it deter Republicans from coming up March the 21st, 2009.
Right. You know, if the press secretary is correct that there are these negotiations going on a major or significant manager's amendment, if those are really happening, then they're kind of happening in secret, because this is the first I've heard about it. And I would assume that, given the fact that the rule is our jurisdiction, that that's what we do, that perhaps there may be some members of this committee who are on that kind of secret negotiating team, and I was wondering whether that's the case, and if there is a secret negotiation going on a major or significant manager's amendment, maybe the chairman can help us determine which back room we should go to offer ideas to maybe influence that manager's amendment. Do you know, is there a negotiation going on a major and significant manager's amendment?
Let me say this, that I believe what is occurring is that we are working diligently, meaning a number of staffs, up to including the gentleman from Ways and Means, Mr. Brady, the gentleman from Energy and Commerce, Mr. Walden, Mrs. Black, the chairman of the Budget Committee, a number of other people, and this committee staff and myself are engaged in looking at what is the package going to look like, what would be the demands, when might we do this, how do we place all the things together. It would not surprise me if we do announce rather quickly, but maybe not today, but quickly, soon, when we would be moving forward. It is my intent that we will provide, as we always should and do, the timeframes that will enable people to look at the bill.
And so we expect a manager's amendment.
I did not even address
oh,
that. I
well,
told you it
yeah.
would not surprise
Oh, okay,
me.
all right, all right.
But that is not unusual as you go through these processes to perhaps tighten up or change or do something. So it wouldn't surprise me at all, and I'm not opposed to that.
You're right, and I'm not opposed to technical corrections that oftentimes are part of a manager's amendment, but in the White House press conference, in the press conference yesterday, it was described as a major or significant manager's amendment, which implies more than technical corrections. And look, one of the reasons why we're concerned is, you know, there was a CBO estimate that says that the Republican bill would cause 24 million people to lose their health insurance. I know the gentleman has issues with that, but you know, but if there's going to be a major or significant manager's amendment, would it be available for 72 hours? And I don't mean posting it at midnight on Friday night. I mean, you know, legislative working hours so that the public can analyze it. And also, would there be time for the CBO to be able to score this again? I mean, if it's a major or significant manager's amendment, you know, I think it might be helpful to get a CBO score before we report it out of Rules Committee before it comes on the floor. So, I mean, can we be guaranteed 72 hours, you know, legislative working hours so we could analyze it? And will you give CBO a time to rescore it?
Well, in fairness to your fair questions, I would tell you that you could potentially work through these things that are observations that I make, and that is when Mrs. Black completes her work, and there are a number of activities at the Budget Committee which I cannot predict the outcome for. One of our great members here is on the Budget Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Woodall, and Mr. Woodall is in constant contact. There's no secret, but he serves on another committee, and they are going to move through their process and their responsibilities and then pass it on to us. And once we look at the entire matter and everybody sees what it looks like, it would not surprise me of anything that you've spoken of, that we might have a manager's minute, that it could contain information that may not have been exactly the same. But I would expect that the changes, if there are any, would be able to be understandable, explainable. I've asked the gentleman, Mr. Brady, I've asked the gentleman, Mr. Walden, and Ms. Black to make themselves available to the committee as expert, which I consider them to be witnesses about the legislation that may be contained therein.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate
So
that.
that's about where we
no,
are.
and I'll close, but let me just say that, you know, and I appreciate the gentleman engaging me, but I got to be honest with you. I don't think I know any more about the process now than I did when I began
In
this.
fact, you do.
A line of
In fact,
questioning.
you do, and that is that we are moving through a process that we understood it was going to go Energy and Commerce, Ways and Means, and we're going to do the Budget Committee, that you would recognize that I don't presuppose those answers that we got out because people wanted to know where the CBO budget numbers were. That has been released. That has been out for some period of time. And that as this is put together, there might be changes.
Yeah,
The speaker indicated it was exactly where he thought it would be.
Look, I think we're just responding to things that we hear coming out of the White House and by your good friend, Sean Spicer.
He is a very dear friend.
You know, I mean, it'd be better to be able to learn things directly from the people here in this House. You know, this is, I'm going to tell you, this is Sunshine Week.
It is Sunshine.
Every year, the American Society of News Editors organizes Sunshine Week to call attention to the need for more transparency in our government, and I think I wanted to make sure you're aware of that, and here we are. You know, last week, the majority marked up the repeal bill in the dead of night without a single hearing.
It did not start in the dead of night. It
probably
ended
right, without a single hearing.
27 hours.
What hearing? There were no hearings, there were markups. There was without a single hearing and without expert, nonpartisan analysis from the CBO. And now that we have a score, we see why I think you wanted to avoid waiting for the CBO, because we now find out that 24 million people will lose their health insurance under this plan. But now we're hearing from the White House that there are more closed-door backroom deals being made during Government Sunshine Week. And the irony of closed-door negotiations on major last-minute changes literally during Sunshine Week. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And I think this is serious business. This is about people's lives. And I know we have philosophical differences on how we should approach healthcare, but the idea that, no hearings, and we don't even know what the process is going to be, or whether any of us will be able to offer any amendments.
Well,
I think that's,
I've already told you, whether we offer that or extend that, I would expect and understand that lots of Republican members are preparing to do that.
I can't even get an assurance that a major or significant manager's amendment would be made available for 72 hours in advance.
Well, here's what I will tell you. I will tell you that as soon as one becomes available, and
You'll let me know,
we would
right.
know more after Mrs. Black does her work.
Right.
And I think it's fair to ask me at that point, too. The gentleman sees me, and I know we're up here in public, and I'm all for that, but it does offer me an opportunity to thank Mr. Spicer for making these announcements out of the White House. I just was not in that loop yet, and I apologize.
Well, anyway, I appreciate the gentleman engaging me, but, I mean, I think, as I said, we're looking for some clarity here because we're very, very concerned about the product that is moving
One
its way
thing I
through the House.
guarantee you,
And we'd just like to know what's in this bill. And again, 72 legislative hours in advance to be able to read a major or significant manager's amendment is how it's being described. I don't think it's too much to ask, given the fact that there were no hearings on the bill. So I yield back my time, and I thank the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman very much. And by the way, I'm very open to discussing this. I would not have described it at that point. But let's get Mrs. Black through her stuff, and then once she finishes her work, we'll have an idea of what it will look like. And I appreciate it, gentlemen. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll now move on to the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma, the gentleman, Chairman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 1259, the VA Accountability First Act of 2017, a structured rule. Rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute, consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-7, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by a proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 1367 to improve the authority of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to hire and retain physicians and other employees of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and for the purposes under structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes in order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute, consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-6, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and unopponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. Rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 3 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 1181, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
You've now heard the motion from the gentleman. I'll defer myself just for a moment to explain what we're doing here. We're doing one rule, three bills. HR 1259, Veteran Accountability. Structured rule makes an order 9 amendments, 4 Republican, 5 Democrats. Motion to recommit. HR 1367, Vets Hiring. Structured rule makes an order 14 amendments, 4 Republican and 10 Democrat amendments. Motion to recommit. HR 1181, the Vets Second Amendment Bill, which is a closed rule. There's a motion to recommit that's attached to that. I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there an amendment or discussion to that gentleman from Massachusetts?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 1259, H.R. 1367, and H.R. 1181 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the House floor.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Seeing none, the vote now will be on the government amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Noes have it, noes have it. Is there further amendment or discussion? Yes, sir.
I have an amendment to the rule, and I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for my amendment to H.R. 1367, number 2, which would allow the Secretary of the VA to fill any vacant position within the VA, regardless of whether the position was vacated before or after the hiring freeze.
Thank you very much. Discussion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I offer this amendment out of great concern for what the hiring freeze may very well do to this agency. Federal agencies are not permitted to refill positions that become vacant due to retirements or staff departures. This approach to reducing the size of the government through attrition harms their abilities to refill critical positions. I want to be clear. All positions, whether they are the custodians who keep the buildings clean or the doctors who perform surgical procedures, all of these positions are critical. As a reminder to my colleagues on the committee, thousands of veterans received medical procedures with improperly cleaned equipment between 2004 and 2009, and a lot of that took place in districts that members on this committee are privileged to serve. Procedures such as colonoscopies were performed with equipment contaminated with hepatitis and HIV/AIDS. Constituents of mine were exposed, and those in Miami that I do not represent. That was a major situation. A number of factors led to this, but one was staffing. We've heard here today that the VA is currently short 45,000 employees. Cutting even more positions won't help in this situation. The majority has a bad habit of blaming federal employees for government spending, and the hiring freeze is a good example of that. I did not know the information that our colleague, Mr. Lynch, presented, and I'm going to ask him to make sure that I have it so that I can bring it up from time to time and get the source for it. Of the federal employees in this country, according to what Mr. Lynch said here today, 620,000 of them are veterans. And he went on to cite other examples of how the hiring freeze will affect veterans. The hiring shortage is already putting veterans at risk of receiving poor health care, and we should not be imposing rules on the hiring of VA support staff that puts even more strain on the agency's ability to care for veterans. If this committee is not willing to fully exempt the Veterans Administration from the hiring freeze, the next best thing would be to ensure that any position that is currently vacant can be filled. Mr. Chairman, I feel this is a common sense amendment, and I urge the committee to make it in order. And I might add, I find it disappointing, and maybe it is to send us messages in the minority that serve on this committee, that I do not take up the time of council, and I don't come here with regularity, which I could, on many of the amendments that we get an opportunity to see before they hit the floor. And somewhere along the line, there has to become some accommodation. Otherwise, you're going to find that we're going to be a lot more recalcitrant as we move forward, at least I am, with reference to matters ongoing. I'll give an example. The colloquy that you allowed, Mr. Chairman, with Mr. McGovern was very healthy. I had not planned to say anything because I honestly thought my amendment would be made in order. But my tendency now is to recognize that likelihood is not particularly strong. Some of the amendments that were made in order weren't nearly as common sense as the one that I offered that would help us. But if you all really are about the business of wanting to do health care, then you shouldn't do what Democrats did, and that is to shut people out from the process. What is needed here, you're running into difficulty, and you're going to have an enormously complex road ahead of you, and I think everybody on this committee knows that. If you wanted, you could hear from some of us who might very well want to do the fix that is necessary to so-called Obamacare so that we can move forward and help this country. We're headed toward a real crisis, and you're leading that, and you will come to rule the day, not so much politically. Most of you will win your elections, and most of us will win ours, and we'll go forward. But we aren't doing one thing to do a bipartisan effort, and God bless the United States Senate. I hope that they come to their senses and put something together that will allow for the American public to receive the necessary care that is needed. I hear all of this talk back and forth, but in this particular instance, we're getting ready to do major harm to veterans by not just allowing at least people to vote on something that is common sense. I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. There's a further discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I happen to agree with almost everything my friend from Florida had to say, with the exception of the conclusions that he drew about the motivations behind that process. I'll tell you, every time I see an amendment that has the Polis name on it, or the Hastings name on it, or the McGovern name on it, or the Slaughter name on it, I ask those same questions. Have we been over backwards? Have we done everything we can? Because sitting on this committee needs to mean something, not just in the 9, but in the 4. And I will tell you that every single time I ask that question, folks say, Rob, we've done everything that we can to try to work together. In this case, I'm told the parliamentarians identified a point of order right off the bat with your amendment. Now, could we waive that point of order? Of course we would. Do we do that? Of course we could. Do we do that from time to time? Of course we do. Do we do it as a matter of practice? We don't. And if you ask any of our members over here, they will tell you that we send them back to the parliamentarian and back to the parliamentarian and back to the parliamentarian and back to the parliamentarian to try to work that out. I know that one of these days, if the good people of the 7th District send me back here, I will be sitting in one of those 4 chairs over there. And it is critically important. But what I love about our chairman is that there is not a time that we have any of these discussions with any committees, whether it's the secret negotiating committees that I'm not aware that exist, but Mr. McGovern references, or whether it's simply sitting at the leadership table. This chairman fights not just for the 9 of us over here, but for the 4 of you all over there, to his detriment, day in and day out. And he doesn't brag about it. I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
Well, already, and thank you, Jim, already you've, in this particular rule, waived in 4 instances points of order against consideration of the bill. And in addition, I'll bet you, if we look very carefully at the amendments that were made in order, we'll find that the parliamentarian probably had some difficulty with some of them as well. You can waive it, as you rightly point out. And I recognize we didn't push up this amendment without careful thought. I recognize that the CBO says that it will score. and they were not prepared to score it. But the kind of thing that I'm getting ready to start doing here is pointing out many of our fallacies, not just in this committee, but in this institution. We just offered up to the CBO a product that they scored. And there's an ideological difference about that particular product. But now what I'm hearing is that this is the first of 3 baskets or something, and it's unfair to CBO to allow that they scored something based on the information that they had. And until such time as you produce a product, then you're going to find piecemeal scoring, and you're going to find those of us that are unhappy. We need to guard this institution, not me or you or any of us on this committee. The institution itself is the fundamental underpinning of this country. And whether or not you waive an amendment for somebody that's on the Rules Committee, I've accepted the pain of being here in the minority, and I won't be here perhaps when some of you are in the minority. But I promise you, you will be one day. And when you are, then you ought give consideration to the people that come up here and labor actively and repeatedly in an effort to try to get something done in this institution. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Wake me up 4 o'clock in the morning, I'll tell you the same damn thing.
Reclaiming my time, I don't disagree with my friend there again. If I'm sitting in those 4 chairs, I will do the very same thing. I think we owe each other that kind of accountability. But in that spirit, to suggest that we gave 4 waivers to any Republican amendments on our side would not be accurate. Of course, we've made waivers for the base text as we do day in and day out for base text. Not one member of the Republican side, and don't think there weren't any, not one member of the Republican side who wanted a waiver for his amendment got one. Wanted a waiver for her amendment, she didn't get one. And so I just say to my friend—
Would the gentleman continue to yield?
Be happy to yield.
If you'll just yield 1 minute, I'll relent on this particular amendment. But I promise you I'm going to start bringing germane amendments in great abundance that will occupy time in this institution that's unnecessary. That's all I want to say.
Well, I have worked with the gentleman for 6 years now, and I don't believe he spent a moment of time that was unnecessary. I say he spends moments of time invested in the service of his constituents, and I have great respect for him because of that, and I have partnered with him on bills about which I am very proud.
Well,
I just didn't want you to leave with the misimpression that we have a chairman who does anything but fight, not for 9 of us, but for all 13 of us, even when it's a lonely voice in the room that he's doing it. And rather than condemn him for his efforts in that respect, I want to applaud him for his efforts. And, Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful to you for it.
Gentlemen, yield for 1
Be
second.
happy to yield.
I mean, if I don't know whether any of these amendments need points of order, but if they don't, let's strike the provision that says waives all points of orders against amendments printed in Part A of the report.
I appreciate the gentleman, that could bring unlimited chaos on the floor for things. And you and I both know, after service in this committee, that is a blanket statement to protect so that we move forward. And it would be used by a Republican majority, a Democrat majority. I think that we try and highlight those things, and I think there's a general agreement between the gentleman who is the staff director and the ranking member staff director about those things, and there is a vigorous discussion on a regular basis. And while I don't ask these young men to come give testimony before us today, I regularly do ask that we are making sure that there is agreement in the things that we try and do, more than not. And I know the gentleman is entitled to his opinion, both gentlemen, all 3 gentlemen. But I want you to know that we really attempt to have regular discussion. And I will tell you, your ranking member, staff director, is not shy about his viewpoints. We try and take them into account. We try and have a working relationship. Is there any other comment? I'd like to make a comment directly to the gentleman from Florida before we leave this subject.
Yeah, I would just say for the record that I would prefer less discussion and more amendments in order.
Yes, sir.
And I think we could promise that on our side if that were the deal.
I have no doubt that I not only understand that, but I think the gentleman, your entire minority members and staff have done nothing but try and help the efficiency of this body so that we can be good, and it goes all the way to the top. Ms. Slaughter and each of you, let's get moving, let's start on time. I've seen no delay, none. I've seen an insistence of let's get it going and try and be efficient, and I've received nothing but help from you. Nothing but help, and I have only accolades, and for the staff, which I very rarely, every 4 or 5 years we say something nice. Well, we ought to say it again tonight so that we're good for 4 or 5 years. Thank you. Thank you to each of you who bring your time up here and your talents to this committee. But it needs to be said that you have vigorous support on your side that we listen to. Further discussion. Mr. Hastings, I'm going to yield myself time. It is probably, I will say something, I'm not going to say my fault, but that I erred in. I chose not to bring up a discussion, and at the appropriate moment, I will enter into the record, but I would make it available to the gentleman. In fact, your amendment that you brought forth is one that struck us several months ago when the president announced a freeze, that there was a discussion that took place among a number of people, including the gentleman who's the chairman of the committee, the gentleman Chairman Rowe, the gentleman Johnny Isaacson from Georgia, and they instructed themselves to write a letter which they signed to the President of the United States that brought up exactly your points, and that is the Veterans Administration of the United States of America should not be held hostage with any position or anything that would provide the necessary services. As a result of that letter, I have received back, I don't know who all knows this, I will make it available to you. It is I should have brought it forward earlier, but I'll be very pleased to give it to you. Department of Veterans Affairs from the Acting Secretary in January. And sir, it outlines the need for us in the Veterans Administration to have an override, to be able to address exactly what you said in places like Monterey, California, Palo Alto, California, Riverside, San Jose, on and on and on, Denver, Colorado, Worcester, Massachusetts. I know. And I have erred by not bringing this forward. Portland, Oregon, the specific titles of the kinds of people, nurse, optometrist, podiatrist, dental officer, psychiatrist, social worker.
With the chairman,
Yes, sir.
You're making a compelling argument for why there should have been the waiver so that this could be on the floor.
What I'm suggesting to you is it is my fault for not addressing this and saying the gentleman is correct. But I would like to reinforce something that you did bring up, and that is, why don't you guys see this too? And we ought to have a member of this committee, which is what brought the gentleman from Georgia, I think, to my defense. It's my fault. I should have. I've part of my questioning before this. So I accept it. It's my fault. But exactly what you brought up, and they were granted. So in fact, what you brought up, we should have been smart enough to say, hey, Judge, here's the list. You want to add a city or two, but this comes directly from the Veterans Administration. So I agree with that. I agree with that. That's my point. It's my fault. I've had it sitting here. I just, it's hard to know what's in everybody's package. Well, and I will tell you this, the gentleman is a valuable part of this committee. Okay, is there further discussion? The gentleman has an amendment that is on the floor. Further discussion, hearing none, the vote is now on the Hastings Amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. Noes have it. Thank you very much. We will now, further amendment or discussion, we will now move to the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
As for roll call.
The gentleman asks for roll call vote. The clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Buck. Mr. Buck, aye. Ms. Cheney. Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk will
aye.
report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman, Mr. Buck from Windsor, Colorado, will be handling this for Republicans.
And Mr. Hastings.
Judge Hastings will be
Minority.
handling this for Democrats. Let's please remember, for the record, the gentlewoman, Mrs. Slaughter, is stuck in snow to her eyebrows, and the gentleman, Mr. Newhouse, is suffering same with weather delays getting here. Judge, I'm going to make sure you get a copy of this without objection. I'm going to enter this into the record. Thank you very much. Is there further work before the committee today? Seeing none, thank you. If you want to give a Xerox of this, I encourage it.